In the soft stillness of evening, when the world around you begins to settle and the mind drifts toward a calmer rhythm, it can feel soothing to imagine the landscape of the human brain as a place of quiet geography, not a harsh or mechanical terrain, but a gentle expanse shaped by delicate curves, flowing pathways, and softly folded surfaces that echo the natural patterns of hills, riverbeds, and drifting shorelines. As you settle into this first part of our exploration, the aim is simply to invite you into that landscape with ease, allowing the mind to float slowly over its features, the way one might glide over a peaceful map at night. Nothing here is rushed. Nothing here demands effort. Instead, we will take time to ease into the idea of the brain's structure, the regions called lobes, and the way these areas support our experience in a calm and continuous way. The brain, resting comfortably within the protective cradle of the skull, is composed of many parts, but the largest and most visually familiar is the cerebrum, the broad upper portion that arches gently across the head from front to back. Its surface is not smooth, but folded into rounded ridges known as gyri and shallow valleys called sulci. These folds allow an impressive amount of neural tissue to be contained within the space available, a design that is not abrupt or forceful, but quietly efficient, as though nature preferred to pack complexity in gentle waves rather than straight lines. When you imagine these ridges and valleys, you might picture soft dunes shifting beneath a calm breeze, or the subtle ripples that form on water as it settles after movement. This folded surface is the outer layer of the cerebrum, called the cerebral cortex, a place where countless neurons work in steady cooperation to support thought, sensation, movement, and awareness. Although textbooks often separate the cerebrum into distinct lobes, the truth is that the brain is not composed of tightly walled compartments. Instead, it behaves much more like an open landscape through which information can glide from one region to the next. The lobes are helpful for studying function, but in real life the boundaries are gentle, with one area blending into another gradually and quietly. The divisions are created by deeper grooves, like the central sulcus or the lateral sulcus, but even these are more like soft pathways than rigid borders. In this way, the brain reflects the broader structure of the body, which is made up of organs and systems that work together, coordinating activities so smoothly that we hardly notice the transitions. Just as the cardiovascular system collaborates with the respiratory system to regulate oxygen and temperature, and just as the endocrine system shares responsibilities with the nervous system to maintain homeostasis, the cerebrum cooperates with itself from one lobe to another, forming an elegant network of communication. At the heart of this harmonious design are neuron-specialized cells that transmit information in delicate electrical pulses and chemical signals. They form an intricate lattice throughout the cortex and deeper structures of the brain, connecting with one another through synapses, tiny junctions that allow signals to pass gently and continuously. These cells vary in shape and length, some branching outward with many dendrites, some stretching through long axons that carry impulses significant distances. Yet despite their varied appearances, they share the same basic job: to relay messages that contribute to the unified workings of the brain. In this sense, neurons are like quiet messengers moving along winding pathways, bringing information from one area to another with subtle precision. Even the simple act of thinking, imagining, or recalling a memory relies on countless such exchanges occurring beneath the surface of everyday awareness. While each lobe of the cerebrum contributes distinct strengths, some processing, movement, some shaping memory, some interpreting vision or sound, they all participate in the broader purpose of integrating information. The brain constantly gathers sensory input from the eyes, ears, skin, and internal organs, combining these signals into a cohesive experience of the world. This is done so gracefully that we often do not realize how many systems are involved in shaping a single moment of perception. The brain receives, organizes, interprets, and responds, all with the same calm efficiency that the body displays when regulating temperature, balancing nutrients, or adjusting oxygen levels. The nervous system acts as both messenger and interpreter, receiving sensory input from peripheral nerves, routing it to the central nervous system, and eventually sending motor commands outward when the body needs to act. Imagine now the brain not as an organ filled with isolated tasks, but as a peaceful field in which many quiet workers perform their roles side by side. The frontal lobe tends to the processes of planning and initiation, shaping intentions and actions. The parietal lobe receives the soft flow of sensory information from the body, interpreting touch, temperature. The temporal lobe listens carefully to sound and nurtures memory through deeper structures that help store experiences. The occipital lobe gently assembles the visual world, turning beams of light into meaningful shapes and colors, and the insular lobe rests tucked in a sheltered space beneath the surface, sensing internal states and contributing to emotional awareness. Together, these 5 lobes form the landscape we will explore, each with its own quiet story to tell. What makes this landscape particularly calming is its continuity. Even though each lobe specializes in certain functions, none acts alone. The motor activities mediated in the frontal lobe depend on sensory information carried by pathways through the parietal lobe. The visual impressions, shaped by the occipital cortex, may activate memories that reside deep within the temporal lobe. The insula may subtly influence how other regions respond to emotions, hunger, or the rhythm of the heartbeat. This integration mirrors the interconnected nature of the human body, described across organ systems. Just as the cardiovascular and muscular systems coordinate when the body works to regulate temperature, the brain's lobes coordinate in quiet partnership to maintain cognitive balance. And just as hormones guide the kidneys and bones in regulating calcium levels to ensure stability, neural circuits coordinate across lobes to maintain internal equilibrium. As you picture this, imagine the brain as a softly glowing sphere of activity, where regions illuminate gently as they work, brightening and dimming in a rhythm that feels almost like breathing. There are no sudden bursts or jarring shifts here. Instead, activity flows like a tide moving through shallow waters. One moment, the frontal lobe may glimmer as you form an intention. The next moment, the temporal lobe may brighten as a memory arises. Meanwhile, the occipital lobe may shimmer faintly as your visual world settles into clarity. All of these changes are subtle and harmonious, reminding us that the brain is not simply a collection of parts, but a living, flowing system shaped by constant communication. As we continue in later parts, we will explore each lobe one by one, letting the mind drift slowly into their functions, their shapes, and their quiet roles. But here, in this introductory moment, the most important thing is simply to settle into an appreciation of the brain's gentle geography, to imagine its surface as a calm terrain, its interior as a landscape of pathways and cells working in peace, and its functions as soft harmonies that support every breath, every thought, every moment of awareness. The journey ahead will move slowly and steadily, offering time to absorb each idea without haste. For now, let the thought of this remarkably interconnected organ rest softly in your awareness, like a quiet light glowing at the center of your being, steady and serene. 2. How the brain thinks as one calm whole. In the gentle quiet of the mind, beneath the steady rhythm of breathing and the subtle hum of inner awareness, the brain works in a way that feels almost effortless. Although we often think of specific regions performing specific tasks, the deeper truth is that the brain behaves like a calm, interconnected whole, a system in which information drifts smoothly from place to place, creating an experience that feels unified and continuous. In this part of our journey, we will drift slowly into the idea of how the brain gathers sensory input, how it integrates that information, and how it sends signals outward again, all with a rhythm that mirrors the body's natural sense of balance. This is a process that unfolds quietly, like a conversation whispered between distant rooms, each message traveling along pathways that bind the nervous system into one harmonious structure. To begin imagining this, you might picture the body as a vast landscape, constantly sensing. The skin notices the temperature of the air, the weight of clothing resting upon it, and the subtle contact with a surface beneath the body. The eyes gather patterns of light, the ears absorb waves of sound, and internal organs continually send updates about hunger, heartbeat, and comfort. These sensations do not remain where they begin. Instead, they travel through nerves toward the spinal cord and upward into the brain, where they are interpreted with steady, unobtrusive precision. Sensory input is the first step in a cycle that repeats itself endlessly every moment of life, even during sleep, when the senses continue to whisper their quiet messages into the deeper regions of the brain. The nervous system, composed of both the central and peripheral divisions. Cycle. The peripheral nerves, branching outward throughout the body, collect sensory information and bring it inward along pathways known as afferent fibers. Once these signals reach the central nervous system, they enter a space where integration happens, a process by which the brain examines, interprets, and organizes the incoming data. Integration is not abrupt or mechanical. It happens in a way that is calm and layered, with different regions contributing their insights. The parietal lobe interprets the feel of an object. The temporal lobe contributes the memory of when you last encountered something similar. The frontal lobe evaluates how to respond, and the insula may introduce an internal sensation, like a sense of comfort or unease. All of these impressions merge into a single coherent experience. Even though we describe these functions one at a time, they happen simultaneously, guided by networks of neurons communicating in a fluid and coordinated manner. Neurons themselves, the primary carriers of information, are designed for this kind of interaction. Their dendrites reach outward like branching arms, receiving input from many other neurons, while their axons extend like long, slender pathways that deliver signals to distant targets. The behavior of neurons varies widely, but all of them participate in this orchestration of communication, each one contributing to the brain's quiet harmony. This interconnected structure ensures that every sensation, every thought, and every motion is supported by a blend of neural activity. Once the brain has integrated sensory information, it begins the next phase of the cycle, motor output. This is when the brain sends signals outward, guiding muscles, adjusting posture, shifting the expression of the face, or altering the rhythm of breathing. These signals travel along efferent nerve fibers, departing from the central nervous system and carrying commands to the body. The brain does not simply send instructions, it sends them in response to the information it has received, creating a constant loop of guidance and adjustment. If the surface beneath your feet becomes uneven, the parietal lobe detects the change. The frontal lobe decides how to respond, and the motor cortex activates muscles in the legs and feet to maintain balance. If the eyes perceive bright light, the occipital lobe interprets it, and the brainstem adjusts the size of the pupils through automatic reflex pathways. These interactions illustrate the way the brain functions as a coordinated whole, each area quietly offering support to the others, with no strict divisions between their roles. The communication between sensory input, integration, and motor output is deeply tied to the overall organization of the nervous system. The central nervous system, which includes the brain and spinal cord, acts as the control center, processing information and issuing responses. The peripheral nervous system, composed of cranial and spinal nerves, extends outward in a graceful web that connects every part of the body to that control center. Sensory receptors in the skin, muscles, and organs detect changes in the internal and external environment and send their messages inward. The central nervous system receives these messages, evaluates them, and then communicates outward again, guiding muscles and organs through both voluntary and involuntary actions. This cooperation between the central and peripheral systems is seamless, occurring without conscious effort, maintaining stability and responsiveness throughout the body. Some actions are voluntary, such as reaching for a cup or choosing to speak. Others are involuntary, like adjusting heart rate, regulating digestion, or shifting blood flow from one area of the body to another. The autonomic division of the peripheral nervous system manages these quieter tasks, ensuring that internal functions continue steadily regardless of our attention. It adjusts breathing, controls glandular secretions, and maintains internal balance, all while the somatic division manages deliberate, conscious movement. Both of these divisions share pathways, working together without conflict, showing again that the brain and body operate through cooperation rather than division. This shared architecture is mirrored in the brain's own design. Although we speak of lobes as separate regions, neurons frequently send their axons across these boundaries, linking one lobe to another in long, looping circuits. Visual information from the occipital lobe may prompt a memory in the temporal lobe, which may then guide a decision in the frontal lobe, which in turn directs movement handled by motor regions. The pathways overlap and interweave, forming networks that are both complex and harmonious. It is this networked structure that allows the brain to respond with such fluidity to the world, adapting without hesitation, recalling memories, and adjusting behavior with remarkable precision. When we view the brain in this way as a gently unified whole rather than a collection of isolated parts, it becomes easier to appreciate the sense of calm efficiency that underlies every moment of experience. The brain does not need to pause or reflect before responding. It moves seamlessly from one stage of processing to the next. Sensory signals come in, the brain interprets them, and the body responds. This cycle repeats continuously, creating a rhythm that resembles the ebb and flow of breath. The nervous system ensures that even when we sleep, the cycle continues. The brainstem regulates breathing and heart rate. The deeper structures of the brain process memories and emotions, organizing information so that the waking mind can begin the next day with renewed clarity. Even in rest, the brain thinks as one calm whole, maintaining this internal environment with the same gentle coordination that supports every waking action. As you reflect on this continuous interplay of sensing, integrating, and responding, you may find that the idea of the brain becomes less mechanical and more organic. Instead of a hard, segmented machine, it begins to resemble a living forest of activity, where signals travel like currents of wind, touching one area before drifting to another. Each lobe of the brain participates in this circulation of information, contributing its unique strengths, but never acting entirely alone. And so, as we prepare to explore each lobe in depth in the coming parts, we carry with us this foundational understanding. No matter how distinct the functions may seem, the brain itself remains unified, peaceful, and deeply interconnected, thinking not in fragments, but in one continuous flow. 3. What a lobe really is. When imagining the brain from a calm and gentle perspective, it helps to picture it not as a strict diagram or a rigidly divided map, but as a softly folded landscape where regions ease into one another, the way rolling hills blend into the horizon. The term lobe is something we often encounter in anatomical descriptions, yet it does not represent a hard boundary or a sharply enclosed structure. Instead, a lobe is better understood as a broad neighborhood within the cerebrum, shaped by natural folds and grooves, each contributing to the overall harmony of the mind. In this part of our journey, we will drift slowly into the meaning of a brain lobe, easing into the idea of cortical organization and appreciating how these divisions act as useful guides while remaining part of a unified whole. If you imagine the brain's surface as a gentle topography, the most noticeable features are its ridges and valleys. The ridges, called gyri, rise like soft hills, while the valleys, known as sulci, dip gently between them. These folds are not just decorative, they allow the brain to expand its surface area within the limited space provided by the skull. This expanded surface hosts vast numbers of neurons, microscopic cells that form the intricate networks responsible for thought, perception, and movement. When the brain is examined, certain sulci appear deeper and more prominent, and it is these deeper grooves that help define the boundaries of the lobes. But even then, the boundaries are more interpretive than physical. They are helpful lines drawn by scientists to understand function and order, not barriers that stop communication between neighboring regions. The brain does not acknowledge these boundaries in the strict way that words might suggest. Instead, it allows activity to flow freely from one region to another, like water finding its way through connected streams. The most well-known of these dividing grooves include the central sulcus, which gently separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe, and the lateral sulcus, which lies like a curved shoreline, dividing the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal regions. Still, these grooves do not act as walls. They are like landmarks, quiet indicators that help orient the mind to where certain forms of processing tend to occur. When we say that the frontal lobe guides planning, or that the parietal lobe interprets touch, we are referring to general tendencies rather than strict rules. The true nature of the brain is one of flexibility, cooperation, and overlapping roles. This is why the concept of a lobe should always be seen as a helpful framework, a way to understand the brain's geography, but never as a suggestion that its parts operate alone. To appreciate this further, think of the brain as one vast organ system within the body, similar to the way the cardiovascular, respiratory, and endocrine systems work together. Textbooks often divide these biological systems to simplify study, but in reality, they function through constant communication. The cardiovascular system supports the respiratory system by transporting oxygen from the lungs, while the endocrine system releases hormones that help the organs regulate vital processes. No system works in isolation, and the same is true within the brain. In earlier discussions, we saw how organ systems overlap in their roles, how the cardiovascular, urinary, and lymphatic systems work together to maintain water balance, or how the nervous and digestive systems interact to signal hunger when glucose levels drop. This unity of function is echoed within the brain's structure, reminding us that the lobes are partners rather than separate entities. Within each lobe, there are countless neurons forming networks that support sensory perception, memory, movement, and emotional tone. Neurons vary in shape and length, but they share a very important characteristic: the ability to communicate. They send and receive signals through electrical impulses and chemical messengers, passing information across synapses so small they cannot be seen without powerful microscopes. The cell body of a neuron contains the nucleus, while the dendrites extend outward, receiving signals from neighboring neurons. The axon stretches in the opposite direction, carrying messages away from the cell body toward distant targets. Some axons are incredibly long, over a meter in humans, connecting distant regions of the body to the spinal cord and brain. This structure allows neurons to communicate across regions, crossing lobe boundaries with ease. It is this capacity for connection, not the location of a particular neuron within one lobe or another, that defines how information flows. The brain's architecture exists in 3 dimensions, with layers of fibers traveling above, below, and through the folds, creating a complex and elegant web. No lobe is isolated from this web. Instead, each contributes its unique patterns of connectivity, allowing thoughts, sensations, and memories to drift from one place to another. The cortical layers that compose each lobe add another layer of gentle complexity. The cerebral cortex consists of gray matter on its surface, dense with neuron cell bodies, and white matter beneath it, filled with axons wrapped in insulating myelin. The gray matter feels like a processing zone, where signals are interpreted and shaped, while the white matter acts like a vast communication highway, enabling quick and efficient movement between regions. This organization repeats across all the lobes, giving them a consistent structure even though their functional roles differ. The white matter tracks crossing between lobes create an interconnected environment in which no thought, sensation, or movement relies on a single region. Instead, each experience is a product of signals blending across networks. When you recognize a familiar face, for example, Your occipital lobe first processes the visual details. The temporal lobe retrieves the memory of that person, and the frontal lobe shapes your emotional and social response. The lobes work not as isolated units, but as a unified chorus. Another way to think of the lobes is to picture them as regions where certain types of processing are more concentrated. The frontal lobe emphasizes planning and motor functions. The parietal lobe focuses on spatial and sensory integration. The temporal lobe attends to memory, sound, and meaning. The occipital lobe interprets vision, and the insular lobe supports awareness of internal states. But these descriptions reflect tendencies rather than absolute rules. Each lobe contributes to many tasks, and many tasks rely on contributions from multiple lobes. Even language, often described in terms of specialized areas, emerges from a distributed network that spans the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobes. Movements, too, depend on sensory input, motor planning, and internal cues, seamlessly blending across regions. What truly defines a lobe is not its boundary, but its role within the larger flow of thought and sensation. The idea of lobes gives us a way to approach the brain with clarity and organization, yet it is important to remember that the real brain, the living one, is constantly in motion, constantly integrating, constantly bridging its regions. To understand a lobe is to understand a part of a larger harmony, a section of a continuous landscape shaped by experience, shaped by biology, and shaped by the subtle activity that makes us who we are. As we prepare to explore each lobe in deeper detail in the coming parts, this gentle understanding becomes our foundation. A lobe is not a room within the mind. It is a region in a flowing system. It is a piece of a whole, contributing its quiet strengths to the unified rhythm of thought. And as we continue, we will trace that rhythm through each area, appreciating its structure, its function, and its role in the peaceful architecture of the brain. 4. The nervous system, supporting the lobes. To understand the brain's 5 lobes in their full, quiet harmony, it helps to drift gently into an appreciation of the larger system that supports them, the nervous system itself. While the lobes of the cerebrum shape thought, sensation, memory, and perception, they do not work alone. They depend on a vast network of pathways extending throughout the body, connecting organs, muscles, tissues, and sensory receptors in a continuous loop of communication. This system does not operate with noise or force. Instead, it behaves with a calm regularity, moving information through the body the way a soft breeze moves through leaves. In this part of our journey, we will move slowly through this supportive structure, letting the mind settle into a peaceful understanding of the central and peripheral nervous systems, the delicate fibers that carry signals, and the remarkable coordination that quietly upholds each moment of awareness. The nervous system begins with the central nervous system, or CNS, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain, with its folded surface and intricate inner structures, serves as the primary processing center. The spinal cord, extending downward through the protective channel of the vertebral column, acts as a graceful conduit, carrying messages to and from the brain. These two components make up the core of the nervous system's intelligence. Surrounding them, branching outward through the body, is the peripheral nervous system, or PNS, a network of cranial and spinal nerves that reach into every region: arms, legs, organs, muscles, skin, and deep tissues. Through this network, the brain communicates with the body, receiving sensory input and sending motor output. Although this system is extensive, it behaves with an effortless efficiency, allowing communication to flow rapidly and quietly. To appreciate how the nervous system supports the lobes, it helps to imagine a cycle that repeats continuously: sensory input, integration, and motor output. Sensory, receptors throughout the body, detect changes both inside and outside of us, A shift in temperature on the skin, a sound drifting into the ear, the gentle pressure of a surface beneath the feet, or even subtle internal changes, such as blood glucose levels. All of these details are gathered and sent inward along afferent pathways. These signals travel through the peripheral nerves, enter the spinal cord or brainstem, and from there progress toward the cerebral cortex. It is only when they reach the cortex, particularly the regions within specific lobes, that the information is interpreted into something meaningful. Tactile sensations might be mapped onto the parietal lobe's somatosensory cortex. Sounds might be processed within the temporal lobe. Visual input reaches the occipital lobe, and internal sensations from the organs subtly influence the insular cortex. Once the brain receives this information, integration begins. This phase is not hurried or chaotic. Instead, the brain processes sensory input with a layered sense of calm, distributing details to different lobes and regions depending on their nature. A simple object held in the hand might activate networks in the frontal lobe for decision-making, the parietal lobe for touch and spatial recognition, and even the temporal lobe if the object triggers a memory. Integration is the step in which information becomes experience, and it relies on the cooperative interplay of many lobes rather than the isolated function of one. The nervous system makes this possible through its highly organized structure, where millions of neurons work together like quiet participants in a shared task, each contributing its own subtle voice to the larger harmony. After integration comes motor output. Based on the brain's interpretation, signals are sent outward along efferent nerves, guiding movement, adjusting posture, controlling facial expressions, or altering internal processes such as heart rate or breathing. These outgoing commands travel down the spinal cord and through the peripheral nerves until they reach muscles or glands. Even actions as simple as taking a step or lifting a hand rely on this coordination. The motor cortex within the frontal lobe initiates movement, the spinal cord carries the impulse, and peripheral nerves activate the appropriate muscles. Each part supports the others, forming a pathway that is both direct and beautifully coordinated. Within the peripheral nervous system, there are two major divisions that help maintain this harmony: the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic system manages voluntary movements, those actions you consciously choose. It carries signals from the brain to the muscles and brings sensory information back for interpretation. The autonomic system, in contrast, handles the involuntary functions that keep the body stable. It adjusts heart rate, regulates digestion, controls glandular activity, and helps maintain internal balance even when the conscious mind is resting or unaware. These two systems do not compete. They share pathways that allow them to function in a cooperative way, ensuring that both voluntary and involuntary processes are sustained with ease. The brain's lobes rely heavily on the stability created by the autonomic system. For example, the frontal lobe's ability to concentrate depends on steady blood flow and stable oxygen levels. The temporal lobe's involvement in memory formation relies on the smooth regulation of sleep, metabolism, and hormonal activity. The insula, which senses internal states, works in constant connection with autonomic signals that reflect the body's subtle rhythms. Even the occipital lobe, which interprets visual information, depends on the stable pressure and nutrient supply maintained by the system's involuntary controls. In this way, the nervous system acts like a quiet caretaker, ensuring that each lobe can carry out its functions without disruption. At the cellular level, neurons form the groundwork for the nervous system's communication. Their structure reflects their purpose: dendrites receiving information, axons sending it onward, and synapses allowing signals to cross from one cell to another. Neurons vary in shape and size. Some are short and compact, while others stretch for great distances. The longest neurons in the body extend from the spine to the feet, carrying signals across more than a meter of space. Despite these differences, all neurons share the same goal of transmitting information smoothly and reliably. Their electrochemical signals are subtle but powerful, and when millions of these signals occur simultaneously, they create the fluid experience of thought, sensation, and movement. What is especially calming about the nervous system is its consistency. Even when the world becomes busy or overwhelming, the nervous system continues its work in the background, maintaining order, regulating function, and supporting the brain's needs. The spinal cord adjusts reflexes, protecting the body with rapid responses that do not require conscious thought. Cranial nerves allow the senses to remain alert, sending information directly to the brain. Deep within the brainstem, automatic processes continue their steady rhythm, ensuring that breathing remains smooth and the heartbeat remains regular. These functions provide a foundation upon which the lobes can perform their more complex tasks. The nervous system's role in supporting the lobes becomes even more apparent when considering how easily information flows between them. A sound processed in the temporal lobe may trigger a memory, which engages deeper networks, while the frontal lobe may shape a decision about how to respond. The occipital lobe may send visual impressions to the parietal lobe for spatial interpretation. These pathways depend on the structural integrity and connectivity provided by the nervous system. Without the speed and the payments that build in 70/ these connections, the lobes would be isolated, unable to communicate, unable to form the cohesive experiences that define daily life. As you imagine the nervous system supporting the lobes, consider it as a quiet lattice that extends through the body, threading through tissues, rising into the skull, and folding softly through the brain's surface. Each lobe rests gently within this structure, supported by it, nourished by it, and connected by it in countless subtle ways. The nervous system is not merely a network, it is the foundation that allows the 5 lobes to exist as parts of one mindful whole. And as we continue onward, exploring each lobe in more detail, this understanding will help each region feel more connected, more integrated, and more harmoniously part of the gentle landscape of the brain. 5. The frontal lobe's peaceful position. To understand the frontal lobe, it helps to imagine the cerebrum as a gently rounded landscape stretching beneath the shelter of the skull. And at the very front of this landscape lies a region that feels both spacious and quietly purposeful. The frontal lobe rests just behind the forehead, occupying the large anterior portion of the brain, extending backward until it meets the central sulcus, a natural groove that creates a soft transition between the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe behind it. When you picture this region, imagine a space devoted to intention, shaping the choices, movements, and ideas that slowly rise into awareness. Its position at the front of the brain mirrors its role in guiding thought and action, as though it sits at the horizon of mental activity, watching gently over the processes that help shape daily life. The frontal lobe spans the largest area of the cerebral cortex, a vast landscape of neural tissue folded into ridges and valleys that increase surface area and allow for complex processing. These folds, or gyri and sulci, curve gradually across its surface the way soft waves roll across a quiet shore. Nothing about its structure is abrupt. Even its borders feel like transitions rather than boundaries, shaped by natural indentations of the cortex rather than walls. The central sulcus forms its posterior edge, separating it from the parietal lobe, while the lateral sulcus helps distinguish it from the temporal lobe below. Despite these anatomical markers, the frontal lobe does not function independently. Its position allows it to receive, interpret, and integrate information from across the brain, playing a central role in coordination and planning. This openness of structure reflects the deeper truth that the brain does not work in isolation. From one region to another, it operates in a gentle, continuous network, with the frontal lobe acting as one of its most active and thoughtful participants. Within its broad expanse, the frontal lobe contains a number of regions that each contribute to its overall function, but again, without strict boundaries or sharp separations. The area closest to the central sulcus is known as the primary motor cortex, responsible for initiating voluntary movement. Yet, even here, the neurons that orchestrate motion do not create sudden or disjointed actions. Instead, they form patterns of activation that ripple smoothly through the spinal cord and outward through the peripheral nerves, creating coordinated and fluid motions. This part of the frontal lobe complements the somatosensory cortex in the parietal lobe, which lies directly opposite it across the central sulcus. Together, these two regions allow the brain to sense and respond, weaving sensation and movement into one gentle loop of activity. Expanding outward from the motor cortex lies the premotor area and the supplementary motor regions, all of which participate in preparing and refining movement. These areas help plan motion before it occurs, deciding how complex movements should unfold. Their work is quiet and anticipatory, creating a sense of readiness without urgency. When you lift a hand, turn your head, or take a step, the frontal lobe has already shaped the intention, examined the surrounding environment, and mapped out the movement that will follow. It is not simply ordering the body to act, it is imagining the action before it happens, crafting a small preview of the movement and allowing it to flow naturally into motion. Perhaps the most defining aspect of the frontal lobe lies in its prefrontal cortex, the region that fills the frontmost part of this lobe and plays a central role in planning, reasoning, emotional guidance, social awareness, and long-term decision-making. This area acts like a gentle conductor, bringing together information from the other lobes, weighing choices, and helping guide behavior in a way that feels thoughtful and deliberate. It is the part of the brain that allows you to hold an idea in mind, consider consequences, and approach challenges with patience. Yet it also responds to internal cues, subtly shaping emotional tone and personal expression. The prefrontal cortex does not operate in isolation. It communicates constantly with the temporal lobes for memory, the occipital lobes for visual information, the parietal lobes for spatial surroundings, and the insula for internal sensations. Through these connections, the frontal lobe's position also supports one of its most meaningful functions, forming intentions. Because it receives input from so many areas, it serves as a space where experiences are evaluated and transformed into decisions. It gently considers sensory signals, memories, internal needs, and anticipated outcomes. This capacity for deliberation is not hurried. Instead, it flows across networks of neurons that share information seamlessly. Studies of the nervous system reveal that neurons communicate not only through electrical signals, but also through chemical messengers released at synapses, forming a delicate balance between excitation and inhibition. The frontal lobe makes extensive use of this balance, shaping thoughts and actions through networks that emphasize clarity and calm control. Because the frontal lobe sits at the forward edge of the cerebrum, it is also sensitive to the influences of the autonomic nervous system, the gentle, involuntary regulation of heart rate, breathing, and internal balance. When the body experiences stress, the frontal lobe helps interpret and regulate the response. When the body feels safe, the frontal lobe supports reflection, creativity, and planning. This interplay between body and mind highlights how deeply interconnected the lobes and the broader nervous system truly are. A thought may arise in the frontal lobe, but it is shaped by sensory input, emotional memory, internal state, and the subtle adjustments of countless neurons throughout the brain. The frontal lobe's quiet influence also extends to language, particularly in the area known as Broca's region, located in the left hemisphere for most individuals. This area helps coordinate the muscles involved in speech and also supports the cognitive aspects of producing language. Its work is gentle but precise, guiding the transition from thought to spoken word. Even here, collaboration with other lobes is essential. While the frontal lobe shapes expression, the temporal lobe contributes understanding. The parietal lobe helps process sensory cues, and the insula monitors internal tone and social context. As you imagine the frontal lobe resting at the front of the brain, consider how its location gives it a vantage point over many aspects of life. It faces the world in a symbolic sense, shaping how we respond, how we choose, and how we guide our actions. Yet it does so quietly, never imposing, always integrating. Its position allows it to be both a receiver and an initiator, both patient and active, both thoughtful and responsive. In the gentle architecture of the brain, the frontal lobe stands as a spacious region devoted to planning, intention, movement, and expression, woven seamlessly into the larger harmony of the nervous system. And as we continue to explore the other lobes, this sense of interconnectedness will follow us, reminding us that every part of the brain, no matter how distinct its role, contributes to the peaceful unity of thought and experience. 6. Decision, planning, and inner thought. In the quiet landscape of the brain, the frontal lobe holds a special place as the region where decisions are shaped, plans are formed, and inner thoughts unfold with gentle continuity. When we speak of the mind reflecting, imagining, weighing possibilities, or choosing a direction, we are often describing processes that depend on the prefrontal cortex, the foremost portion of the frontal lobe. This region does not command the body with force or urgency. Instead, it behaves like a patient guide, softly coordinating signals from other lobes and creating an inner space where ideas can drift, settle, and gradually take form. In this part of our journey, we will move slowly through this mental landscape, exploring how the brain forms decisions, how it engages in planning, and how it nurtures the quiet voice of inner thought that accompanies us through daily life. To understand the role of the frontal lobe in decision-making, imagine a moment when you are faced with a simple choice, perhaps deciding what path to walk, what book to read, or how to respond to someone. Even before you consciously recognize the decision, networks within the frontal lobe begin reviewing information gathered from many other brain regions. The parietal lobe contributes sensory details, providing information about your immediate surroundings. The temporal lobe brings forward memories, perhaps, recalling similar moments in the past. The frontal lobe gathers these pieces not in haste, but in a calm and ordered manner, allowing a clear choice to emerge. In this way, decision-making is not a single act but a quiet unfolding, shaped by cooperation across the brain. This capacity for thoughtful choice rests heavily on the organization and flexibility of neuronal networks. Neurons in the prefrontal cortex extend dendrites like delicate branches, receiving signals from widespread areas of the brain. These dendrites allow a single neuron to listen to many sources of information at once, integrating sensory details, emotional cues, and learned experiences into a unified sense of direction. The axons of these neurons then carry outgoing signals, sending decisions forward to areas that organize movement, language, or further planning. Though this communication occurs rapidly, it retains a sense of smoothness, like the calm exchange of ideas within a quiet conversation. This fluid dialogue among neurons provides the foundation for the mental clarity we associate with thoughtful action. Planning, a closely related function, also lives within this gently coordinated space. Planning involves imagining possibilities, anticipating outcomes, and organizing steps in a meaningful sequence. The frontal lobe accomplishes this by holding information temporarily, comparing current details with stored memories, and projecting them into the future. This ability, often described as working memory, it is what allows you to think through the steps of a task, to prepare for an upcoming event, or to set intentions for the day. Rather than directing with pressure, the frontal lobe supports planning through gradual elaboration, letting thoughts form slowly and take shape before moving outward into action. This gentle process becomes even more apparent when emotions are involved. Decision-making rarely occurs without emotional influence, even in the most logical of choices. The frontal lobe communicates closely with deeper regions responsible for emotional tone, such as the limbic system, shaping responses in ways that feel balanced and appropriate. When emotions rise sharply, the frontal lobe helps soften and regulate them. When emotions are faint, it helps bring them into awareness. This relationship illustrates the frontal lobe's role not only as a planner, but as a mediator, helping create a sense of calm control by integrating feeling with thought. Through this integration, decisions become more grounded and plans more aligned with personal values and internal stability. Inner thought, the soft voice that accompanies daily life, is perhaps the most intimate function of the frontal lobe. When you reflect on your day, imagine future scenarios, or simply let your mind wander, it is the prefrontal cortex that nurtures this quiet inner space. Its neurons form networks that allow ideas to drift softly from one to another. These thoughts often appear spontaneously, carried on the currents of memory and imagination. Yet they are shaped by the frontal lobe's orderly nature. It helps filter distractions, maintain focus when needed, and shift attention when thoughts become too narrow. This balance makes it possible to think deeply without becoming overwhelmed, and to relax without losing awareness. The frontal lobe's participation in language further enriches inner thought. When the brain silently phrases ideas in words, organizes sentences, or forms mental dialogues, it cooperates with areas related to language comprehension and memory, shaping this inner speech with clarity and ease. Even when thoughts are not verbal, appearing as images, sensations, or intuitive impressions, the frontal lobe helps organize them, ensuring they can be understood and used to guide behavior. This subtle structuring is part of what makes reflection feel coherent rather than chaotic, because the frontal lobe operates at the intersection of memory, sensation, emotion, and intention. Its work remains deeply interconnected with the broader nervous system. It depends on stable internal conditions, maintained by the autonomic system, to support clear thinking. Hormonal signals from the endocrine system also influence its activity, shaping mood, motivation, and energy levels. Even small physiological changes, variations in glucose, oxygen, or body temperature subtly affect how smoothly decisions form and thoughts unfold. These connections reflect the unity of the body described in earlier teachings. No organ system truly stands alone, and no lobe acts independently of the internal environment. The frontal lobe's ability to guide behavior becomes especially evident in moments requiring restraint or patience. When the brain chooses not to act impulsively, or when it delays a response in favor of reflection, the frontal lobe plays a central role. It helps suppress immediate reactions, giving time for further evaluation. This gentle inhibition creates space for thoughtful choices, helping align behavior with long-term goals rather than momentary impulses. This balance between readiness and restraint is one of the frontal lobe's quiet strengths, supporting steady, purposeful action even in changing circumstances. In moments of creativity, the frontal lobe also becomes a place where imagination is free to roam, whether forming new ideas, exploring artistic visions, or approaching challenges from fresh angles. The frontal lobe allows the mind to shift between structure and openness. It draws from the stored knowledge of the temporal lobe, the sensory impressions of the parietal and occipital lobes, and the internal signals of the insula. Through this collaboration, creativity arises not as a sudden burst, but as a weaving of countless smaller threads. Thought becomes an expansive landscape. As you picture the frontal lobe working in this gentle, multidimensional way, it stands at the front not only in location but in purpose, guiding decisions, shaping plans, and nurturing inner thought with steadiness and grace. Its work unfolds moment by moment, supporting the clarity and continuity of experience. In this calm partnership with the rest of the brain, the frontal lobe allows life to feel organized, intentional, and deeply connected. preparing us for the next steps in our journey through the remaining lobes. 7. Gentle movement. The motor cortex movement, at its most soothing and natural level, begins not in the muscles themselves, but in the quiet expanse of the frontal lobe, where intention first forms and the motor cortex translates those intentions into physical action. When imagining movement in this soft, sleep-friendly way, it helps to picture the brain as a landscape where signals flow like calm streams, traveling effortlessly from one region to another, carrying with them the gentle instructions that guide the body. The motor cortex, resting along the posterior edge of the frontal lobe just before the central sulcus, is the place where thought becomes action. Here, delicate patterns of neural activity create the beginnings of every voluntary movement, from lifting a hand to taking a step to forming the subtle expressions that pass across the face. Even the simplest movement is a quiet symphony, with the motor cortex acting as the first instrument to begin the melody. To appreciate the motor cortex in this calming sense, imagine its surface as a long, graceful band stretching from the top of the brain down toward the area that curves around the head. This region is often described as having a map-like arrangement called the motor homunculus, a gentle representation of the body laid across the cortex. But this map is not rigid or literal. It is more like an artistic impression, where regions blend softly and movement flows between them. Larger portions of this map correspond to areas of the body requiring finer control, such as the hands, lips, and facial muscles. These areas are represented with slightly greater cortical space because the movements they produce require subtlety and precision. The larger muscles of the legs and trunk are represented as well. This delicate arrangement gives the motor cortex the flexibility it needs to shape nearly every action the body performs. When the brain decides to move, the motor cortex does not act abruptly. Instead, activity builds gently within networks of neurons that begin preparing the motion. Before the body is even aware of the intention, neurons in this region extend long axons down through the internal pathways of the brain, passing through deeper structures and eventually reaching the spinal cord. Once there, these signals continue along motor neurons that travel outward toward the muscles. The entire process flows smoothly, like a signal traveling down a calm, winding path. The timing of these signals is coordinated so precisely that even complex movements feel natural and continuous. Walking, turning, reaching, writing, or adjusting posture all arise from the same elegant circuitry. This process is supported by the premotor and supplementary motor areas, which lie just ahead of the primary motor cortex. These regions help prepare movements in advance, especially those that require coordination or planning. If you reach for an object, these areas contribute to understanding the direction and shape of the movement. If you prepare to speak, they assist in forming the sequence of small motions needed to produce sound. They also influence how movements transition from one to another, creating the fluidity that makes physical action feel so natural. The premotor areas work closely with sensory regions, especially those within the parietal lobe, helping integrate visual and tactile information into the motion being planned. The brain must understand where the body is in space, how the environment is arranged, and how the movement will feel as it occurs. The motor cortex, with the help of its neighboring regions, gently blends all this information into a cohesive plan. The spinal cord, too, plays a quiet yet essential role. Once the motor signals reach the spinal cord does not simply deliver instructions. It also refines them through reflex pathways that help maintain balance, posture, and stability. These reflexes operate below conscious awareness, adjusting muscle tone and coordination to ensure that movement feels smooth. The result is a partnership between brain and spinal cord, where the brain shapes the intention and the spinal cord ensures that motion unfolds with steadiness and grace. Muscles themselves respond to these signals by contracting or relaxing in gentle harmony. Each muscle fiber receives a message from a motor neuron, and when many fibers activate together, a movement begins. The strength of a movement depends not on a single signal but on the number of neurons involved and the frequency of their impulses. A light touch requires only a few motor units. A stronger motion requires more. Yet even at higher levels of exertion, the transition remains smooth because the brain modulates these impulses with subtlety. This coordination reflects the intricate relationship between the nervous system and the muscular system described across the body's interconnected systems. Just as the nervous and endocrine systems work quietly to regulate energy levels or stress responses, the motor cortex and muscles work together to create a balance of strength and gentleness. Movement is not only physical, but deeply connected to sensory feedback. The parietal lobe continually sends information to the frontal lobe about the position of the limbs, the pressure on the skin, and the shape of the environment. This feedback allows the motor cortex to adjust actions moment by moment. If a surface beneath the foot shifts slightly, sensory signals travel rapidly to the brain, prompting adjustments in muscle activity to restore balance. If a grip on an object feels too loose, tactile feedback encourages the hand to tighten slightly. These subtle corrections occur continuously, forming part of the brain's integrated loop of sensation and action. Emotion also influences movement, often in ways that feel natural and quiet. When the body is calm, movements become slower, softer, and more deliberate. When the mind feels lighter, gestures may appear more fluid or expressive. These changes arise because the motor cortex communicates with emotional centers deep within the brain, adjusting the tone of movement so it aligns with internal states. Even breathing, a movement that lies partly under voluntary control, is shaped gently by the motor cortex and the autonomic nervous system working together. The result is a harmony between physical action and emotional rhythm. The motor cortex also works closely with the cerebellum, a structure located at the back of the brain that fine-tunes coordination. The cerebellum ensures that movements are accurate, balanced, and well-timed. Without its quiet adjustments, actions might feel jerky or uncertain. Instead, with its influence, movements become graceful and controlled. This partnership exemplifies the brain's broader theme of cooperation. No region acts alone. The frontal lobe provides the intention, the cerebellum polishes the motion, and the spinal cord carries it forward into action. As you reflect on all these layers of movement from intention to planning, from neural pathways to muscular contraction, movement becomes something more than a physical event. It becomes a gentle expression of the mind, guided by networks of neurons working together in quiet harmony. The motor cortex, resting comfortably on the border between intention and action, shapes this expression with care. Its role is not forceful or abrupt. Instead, it is subtle, patient, and deeply integrated with the rest of the brain. Through its work, thought becomes motion, emotion shapes gesture, and the quiet inner rhythms of the mind unfold outward into the world in soft, coordinated ways. 8. Speech production and expression. Speech, in its calmest and most natural form, emerges not as a sudden burst of sound, but as a gentle unfolding that begins deep within the quiet space of the frontal lobe. Before a single word reaches the lips, before the breath shifts to carry sound, and before the muscles of the mouth prepare to move, the process begins in a region of the frontal lobe known as the speech production area. This area is traditionally associated with Broca's region, located in the left hemisphere for most people, though the true nature of speech involves a broad and deeply interconnected network. In this sense, speech does not originate from a single point. It emerges as a collaboration between thought, intention, memory, emotion, and coordinated muscular activity. To understand this gentle orchestration, we can imagine speech as a soft river that begins as thought, flows through regions of planning. At the beginning of this river lies the intention to speak. Other times it rises spontaneously, shaped by emotion or environment. This early stage of speech depends heavily on the prefrontal cortex, which helps organize ideas, shape meaning, and determine when and how to express them. The prefrontal cortex holds the content of what we wish to say, our thoughts, memories, and emotional tones, while the speech production region begins crafting the movements needed to bring those thoughts outward. It behaves like a gentle translator, turning the fluid, abstract world of inner thought into precise sequences of muscle actions. The complexity of speech lies not in the force of its production, but in its delicate timing. To speak even a single word clearly, dozens of muscles must coordinate in perfect sequence. The tongue shifts, the lips shape sound, the jaw adjusts tension, the soft palate opens or closes to guide the flow of air, and the muscles of the larynx, the vocal cords, vibrate or relax to control pitch and volume. All of this is guided by signals that originate in the speech production area of the frontal lobe. When viewed through a calming lens, this process becomes an intricate choreography where each movement unfolds smoothly in response to the brain's quiet instructions. What makes this system especially beautiful is the way it integrates information from across the brain. The speech production area does not simply create sound. It communicates constantly with the temporal lobe, where speech comprehension and memory help shape meaning. It consults the parietal lobe for feedback on the position and movement of the tongue, lips, and jaw. It takes cues from the emotional centers of the brain, creating tone, inflection, and expressive warmth. Even the occipital lobe may contribute when speech is shaped by something seen or remembered visually. In this way, speech becomes not only an act of the frontal lobe, but a reflection of the entire mind, a quiet weaving together of thought, sensation, and memory. The act of forming speech begins with motor planning. Before the muscles move, the frontal lobe creates a blueprint of the motions required. This plan is shaped by experience. Each word has been practiced countless times throughout life, and the brain stores these patterns like familiar paths. When a word is formed, the brain retrieves its motor pattern and gently prepares the muscles. This preparation involves connections between the frontal lobe and deeper motor structures, such as the basal ganglia, which help initiate movement, and the cerebellum, which fine-tunes timing and coordination. The process happens so smoothly that we rarely notice it, yet it is made possible only by the careful organization of these neural circuits. Breath, too, plays a central role in speech, and breath is shaped both consciously and unconsciously. When preparing to speak, the brain subtly adjusts the rhythm of breathing, drawing in enough air to support the phrase or sentence that is about to be spoken. Even this adjustment involves coordination between the frontal lobe and the brainstem, which regulates the automatic cycles of respiration. Speech-related breathing is slower, more controlled, and shaped by intention. The breath becomes the soft foundation upon which words rest, the quiet force that carries sound gently outward. Emotion influences speech in ways that feel natural and intuitive. When a person speaks softly, the frontal lobe integrates emotional cues from the limbic system, adjusting the voice to reflect calmness, warmth, or thoughtfulness. When speech becomes more expressive, it is guided by the same networks, those that shape decisions, empathy, and self-awareness. Even when speech is entirely internal, such as in silent thought or whispered inner dialogue, the same systems become active, creating the sense of talking to oneself without producing sound. This phenomenon, known as subvocalization, reflects how deeply the speech production region participates in the formation of inner thought. As speech unfolds into fluid expression, sensory feedback becomes essential. The brain listens to the sounds produced by the mouth, comparing them to the intended words. This communication between the frontal and temporal lobes allows subtle adjustments in tone, pronunciation, and clarity. The parietal lobe contributes tactile feedback, letting the brain sense the positions of the tongue and lips. This continuous loop produce, monitor, adjust, creates the smoothness that makes speech feel effortless. Without it, words would sound uneven or uncertain. Instead, The brain creates a gentle refinement that happens moment by moment, guided by the cooperation of multiple lobes. The muscles involved in speech respond with remarkable sensitivity. Tiny adjustments in tension or position can shift the meaning or emotional tone of a phrase. These muscles are among the most finely controlled in the body, capable of producing rapid sequences of movement required for fluent speech. The motor cortex sends signals with precise timing, activating different muscle groups in delicate patterns. These patterns flow effortlessly because they are supported by a lifetime of practice. From early childhood, the brain learns to shape words, refine pronunciation, and adapt speech to context. Over time, these motor patterns become deeply ingrained, ready to unfold whenever needed. Speech also reflects the broader interconnectedness of the brain. Every spoken sentence represents a journey across neural pathways, the visual recall of memory, the emotional shading of meaning, the internal sense of timing, the smooth preparation of movement, and the gentle flow of breath. Even silence, when filled with unspoken thought, depends on these same pathways. Speech is not only an outward expression but a mirror of inner experience, shaped by the frontal lobe's ability to coordinate intention, language, and action. As we conclude this part of our gentle exploration, it becomes clear that speech is far more than a motor action directed by a single area. It is a soft merging of thought and movement, guided by the calm intelligence of the frontal lobe and enriched by the contributions of the entire brain. Through this collaboration, words become not only sounds but expressions of inner life, carried outward with grace, shaped by memory, informed by emotion, and supported by the quiet strength of the nervous system. 9. The parietal lobe's calm location beneath the crown. Just beyond the gentle rise of the frontal lobe, resting quietly beneath the crown of the head, lies the parietal lobe, a region that feels like a softly illuminated crossroads of sensation and understanding. If the frontal lobe is the place where intentions form and actions begin, the parietal lobe is the region where the world is felt, interpreted, and woven into a meaningful map of experience. Its position, tucked between the frontal lobe to the front and the occipital lobe to the back, creates a sense of balance within the brain's architecture, as though it serves as a bridge between outer perception and inner response. This lobe sits comfortably near the top of the head, occupying both hemispheres, extending laterally toward the temporal lobes and deeply inward toward the midline. When you imagine the parietal lobe in this gentle, peaceful way, you can picture it as a quietly attentive region that listens carefully to the body, interprets its messages, and helps the mind remain oriented in space. The boundary between the frontal and parietal lobes is marked by the central sulcus, a deep groove that curves gracefully along the brain's surface. Just in front of this sulcus lies the primary motor cortex, and just behind it lies the somatosensory cortex. Their close proximity reflects a natural harmony. Sensation and movement are linked in a continuous loop, allowing the body to feel its position, adjust its posture, and interact with the world in a fluid way. The parietal lobe extends far beyond this ridge, spreading toward the back of the brain in a smooth expanse of cortex that supports a wide variety of functions, many of them subtle and layered. Although textbooks describe its borders with precision, in living tissue these boundaries feel more like transitions, soft shifts in purpose rather than rigid separations. The parietal lobe blends gently with neighboring regions, communicating constantly with them through networks of white matter tracts. This allows it to serve as an integrator, receiving sensory input and aligning it with ongoing thoughts and actions. Sensory receptors in the skin, muscles, and joints send signals through peripheral nerves, which travel toward the spinal cord and eventually rise into the brain. Once these signals reach the somatosensory cortex, they form a detailed representation of the body, a kind of internal map that helps the brain understand where each sensation originates. Like the motor homunculus on the frontal side of the central sulcus, The sensory homunculus on the parietal side represents the body in an artistic, non-literal arrangement. Regions requiring more refined sensation, such as the fingertips and lips, occupy more cortical space than regions needing less detail. This graceful map helps the brain interpret touch, temperature, texture, pressure, and subtle movements of the limbs, creating an ongoing awareness of the body's position in space. This awareness, known as proprioception, is one of the parietal lobe's most remarkable contributions, an unbroken sense of bodily presence that continues even with eyes closed. The location of the parietal lobe also supports its role in spatial understanding. Much of the world flows into our awareness visually, and the occipital lobe behind the parietal region provides the raw material for vision, shapes, colors, edges, and movement. But understanding where objects are in relation to one another, how far away they appear, and how they relate to the body depends heavily on the parietal lobe. This region connects visual information with tactile feedback, forming a mental map of the environment. It observes the shapes and distances of objects, the angles of surfaces, the orientation of the body, and the pathways available for movement. This spatial sense is gentle and continuous, allowing the mind to navigate through the world with ease. When reaching for an object, walking through a doorway, or adjusting posture in a chair, the parietal lobe quietly guides the body, using a combination of visual and sensory information to ensure movements unfold smoothly. Memory also contributes to these spatial abilities. The parietal lobe does not store memories in the way the temporal lobe does, but it accesses them in subtle ways to help interpret surroundings. Familiar pathways, known objects, and learned tasks are all supported by an ongoing conversation between the parietal lobe and other regions. Even the simple act of placing a hand on a familiar surface involves this interplay. Memory recalls how the surface should feel, and sensory information confirms the experience. The parietal lobe uses such comparisons to refine perception, ensuring that each moment feels coherent and grounded. Another aspect of the parietal lobe's calm location is its connection to attention. While the frontal lobe guides deliberate, conscious focus, the parietal lobe contributes to the effortless shifting of attention toward different regions of space. This shifting is not forced. Instead, it feels like a natural redirection, allowing the eyes, head, and body to orient themselves toward new stimuli or areas of interest. The parietal lobe helps determine what in the environment requires awareness, guiding attention to objects that are near, relevant, or moving. This quiet attentional tuning helps maintain a sense of presence, anchoring the mind gently to the surrounding world. The parietal lobe also participates in the integration of sensory modalities. Touch, sight, sound, and proprioception may originate in different parts of the body, but the brain brings them together into a unified experience. The parietal lobe is one of the key regions for this blending, especially for touch and vision. For example, when watching the hand move, the brain combines visual information from the occipital lobe with sensory feedback from the skin and muscles, updating the internal map of bodily position. This integration ensures that perception remains smooth and coherent. Even the emotional centers of the brain play a part, shaping how sensory experiences feel on an internal level. All these functions, feeling, mapping, attending, and integrating, depend on the parietal lobe's position near the center of the brain's surface. Its placement allows it to receive and distribute information rapidly, ensuring that no sensory detail stands alone. This interconnectedness mirrors the unity of the nervous system itself, where signals from the body and brain flow in continuous cycles. The central and peripheral systems collaborate gently, sending information inward and guiding movement outward. The parietal lobe serves as one of the essential nodes in this network, transforming sensation into understanding and helping the body remain oriented, grounded, and aware. As you picture the parietal lobe resting beneath the crown of the head, imagine it as a calm and attentive listener, receiving the world through the senses and shaping it into a clear, steady sense of presence. Its location gives it access to the body, the eyes, the limbs, and the environment, allowing it to guide movement and interpret the space around you. In this quiet, continuous role, the parietal lobe supports both the body and the mind, making each moment of experience feel integrated, balanced, and gently aligned with the world. 10. Touch, pressure, and the body's whispered messages. When we think of the senses, vision and hearing often come to mind first, yet beneath these louder channels lies another form of perception, quieter, more intimate, and always present. This is the sense of touch, a continuous stream of gentle impressions flowing from the skin, muscles, and joints into the brain. These sensations, subtle and constant, they anchor the body, soften our movements, and help us remain aware of ourselves even when our eyes are closed. All of this delicate information is gathered and interpreted largely by the parietal lobe, especially through the somatosensory cortex, which rests just behind the central sulcus. In this part of our calm exploration, we drift inward toward these soft messages, tracing how impressions from the body rise quietly into consciousness and become part of the steady landscape of experience. To understand how the brain interprets touch, imagine a gentle breeze brushing across the forearm. The sensation begins at tiny receptors beneath the skin, specialized nerve endings that feel pressure, temperature, vibration, and movement. These receptors send signals along sensory nerves, which travel through the peripheral nervous system toward the spinal cord. From there, the signals ascend through organized pathways to the brainstem and finally reach the somatosensory cortex. At each step, the information remains soft and continuous, accompanied by the natural rhythms of the body. The brain receives these signals without haste, interpreting them not as isolated events but as part of an ongoing narrative of bodily presence. The somatosensory cortex contains a map-like representation of the body, a quiet internal reflection of the skin's surface and the deeper tissues beneath it. This map is called the sensory homunculus, and while its appearance in diagrams may seem exaggerated or unusual, its purpose is graceful and intuitive. Areas of the body that require greater sensitivity, such as the fingertips and lips, occupy more space in this map, while regions needing less detail occupy less. This distribution ensures that sensations requiring precision, like feeling the texture of a surface or adjusting the pressure of a grip, receive the cortical attention they need. Though the map is organized, it is not rigid. The boundaries between regions blend softly, allowing the brain to integrate sensations in a fluid, harmonious way. Touch itself is composed of many layers. Some sensations are sharp and clear, such as the pressure of an object held in the hand. Others are diffuse and gentle, like warmth spreading through the fingers or the subtle pull of gravity on the muscles. The parietal lobe sorts these sensations quietly, identifying their qualities and their origins. It distinguishes between light touch and deeper pressure, between smooth textures and coarse ones, between warmth and coolness. At the same time, it compares these sensations with memories, creating a familiar understanding of what is being felt. This blending of present sensation with past experience helps the world feel stable and predictable, even as sensory input changes moment by moment. A comforting gesture, a warm surface, or the softness of fabric can evoke feelings of safety and calm. These emotional tones arise not only from sensory input but also from connections between the parietal lobe and the limbic system, which shapes emotional experiences. When a gentle touch feels soothing, the brain is combining sensation with emotion, forming a layered experience that supports well-being. This interplay is subtle and continuous, reflecting the unity between the sensory and emotional systems of the brain. When standing upright, the body feels the steady pressure of the feet against the ground. When seated, the weight of the body rests against a chair. These sensations ground us, helping us remain balanced and oriented. The parietal lobe receives this information and uses it to update the brain's internal map of posture and position. Even when we are still, pressure signals stream into the brain, allowing the body to adjust its muscle tension in small, quiet ways. These subtle adjustments keep us from swaying, help maintain posture, and prepare the body for movement. Without this constant flow of pressure information, standing or walking would feel uncertain or disjointed. Another essential aspect of somatosensation is proprioception, the sense that lets us know where our limbs are without looking at them. When reaching for an object in the dark or taking a step without thinking, proprioceptive signals guide these movements smoothly. These signals arise from receptors in the muscles and joints, sensing stretch, tension, and movement. They travel to the parietal lobe, where they blend with tactile input and visual memory to form a unified sense of bodily position. Proprioception acts as the body's silent anchor, supporting balance and coordination by keeping the brain informed of the body's posture in real time. Because of this sense, movements feel coherent, and the body can respond naturally to changing conditions. The parietal lobe's ability to interpret these signals depends on the organization of the nervous system as a whole. Sensory input from the body travels through afferent pathways, rises through the spinal cord, and is guided by the central nervous system before reaching the cortex. The nervous system structure ensures that these signals arrive with accuracy and consistency, whether they originate from the fingertips or the soles of the feet. In earlier discussions, we explored how the nervous and sensory systems cooperate to maintain balance, regulate temperature, and integrate signals from multiple organs. This same cooperation supports the somatosensory cortex, providing the clear, steady flow of information the brain needs to create a coherent picture of the body. Once sensory information reaches the parietal lobe, the brain begins to integrate it with input from other regions. Vision, for example, enhances the interpretation of touch by helping identify objects or confirm their position. Hearing contributes to spatial awareness when sounds reflect off surfaces, guiding the body in subtle ways. Even internal sensations from the insula help shape the perception of touch. These interactions highlight the parietal lobe's role as a central hub. The parietal lobe also plays an important role in learning through touch. Repeated tactile experiences strengthen neural pathways, making certain movements and sensations feel familiar. Over time, these learned patterns contribute to motor skills, allowing the body to move with greater confidence and ease. Activities like handwriting, playing an instrument, or gently shaping an object all rely on this collaboration between touch and movement. The parietal lobe provides the sensory feedback that allows these actions to become refined and graceful. As we explore the gentle rhythm of touch, pressure, and proprioception, it becomes clear that the parietal lobe supports a quiet world of sensory experiences that unfold beneath the surface of consciousness. It listens continuously, organizing sensory input into a steady sense of bodily presence. It helps the body remain balanced, helps movements remain fluid, and helps each moment feel grounded. Through its work, the parietal lobe transforms the body's whispered messages into a calm, unified understanding of the world, a gentle foundation upon which thought, movement, and awareness can rest. 11. Spatial awareness and quiet orientation. Spatial awareness unfolds within the mind, as softly as a shadow settling across a quiet landscape. It is not loud, not forceful, and not something we consciously monitor from moment to moment. Instead, it drifts beneath awareness, guiding each movement, each turn of the head, and each adjustment of posture with gentle precision. This ability to sense where we are in relation to the world around us is largely shaped by the parietal lobe. Positioned beneath the crown of the head, the parietal lobe quietly receives streams of information, blends them together, and offers the brain a steady sense of orientation. In this part of our journey, we ease into that quiet capability, exploring how the brain understands space distance, direction, and the constant relationship between the body and its surroundings. Imagine standing in a calm room, the light soft, the air still. Even if you close your eyes, the sense of where you are remains clear. You know where your feet touch the floor, where the walls lie in relation to your body, and how close your hands are to your sides. This awareness arises from the parietal lobe's ability to integrate many forms of sensory information. Touch tells you which parts of the body are in contact with objects or surfaces. Proprioception lets you know where each limb is positioned. Vision, when available, refines these details, enhancing the accuracy of the internal map the brain maintains. Even the orientation of the head, guided by the vestibular system of the inner ear, feeds into this subtle perception. The parietal lobe receives these messages and forms a unified understanding of space. It is the brain's way of maintaining a quiet, moment-by-moment sense of presence. Spatial awareness is not simply about knowing where the body is. It is also about understanding the relationship between objects in the environment. When you reach for something on a table, the parietal lobe helps determine the distance, the angle, and the direction of your movement. It calculates how far the hand must travel, how the wrist should tilt, and how quickly the arm should extend. These calculations happen beneath conscious awareness, allowing the action to feel natural and fluid. The brain does not need to think through each step. Instead, the parietal lobe offers a continuous sense of how the body and the environment relate, gently guiding the motion to completion. This sense of orientation is deeply dependent on the integration of visual information. The occipital lobe processes the raw details of vision, the shapes, edges, and colors of objects, while the parietal lobe interprets these details in terms of spatial meaning. It determines where objects lie in the environment and how they move relative to the body. For example, noticing a cup on a table involves the occipital lobe interpreting the visual form, but it is the parietal lobe that understands how far away the cup is, what direction it lies in, and how it might be reached. This collaboration between vision and spatial interpretation is quiet and seamless, creating a stable sense of the world. Without this integration, the visual field would appear flat and disjointed, lacking depth and spatial connection. The temporal lobe contributes as well, offering memories of familiar spaces or previously learned environments. When you walk through a room you have seen before, even in dim light, your brain draws upon these memories to enhance navigation. The parietal lobe works with the temporal lobe to overlay these remembered patterns onto current sensory input, creating a stable internal map. This blending of information allows the brain to anticipate what lies ahead, making movement smooth and confident. The nervous system's interconnected design supports this process beautifully, just as it supports other forms of cooperation between organ systems throughout the body. In earlier teachings, we learned how the cardiovascular, respiratory, muscular, and nervous systems work together to maintain balance and support activity. In the same way, the brain's lobes, through their vast networks of neurons, work in quiet partnership to produce spatial understanding. Spatial awareness also includes the ability to understand direction, turning left or right, orienting toward a sound, or noticing the position of the sun. All involve subtle calculations made by the parietal lobe. It monitors changes in the body's orientation and responds to directional cues. If you hear a faint sound behind you, the parietal lobe helps determine where the sound is located in space, allowing the head and eyes to turn toward it. These swift adjustments feel almost automatic because the brain is constantly analyzing spatial cues without conscious effort. The vestibular system, located in the inner ear, contributes critical information about movement and balance, and the parietal lobe incorporates these signals into its spatial map. When the body tilts or shifts, the brain senses this immediately and adjusts posture through a combination of sensory feedback and motor signals flowing through the nervous system. This quiet orientation becomes especially important when walking or navigating. As you move through the world, the parietal lobe continuously updates your position, guiding steps so they land evenly, helping avoid obstacles, and ensuring that movement aligns with intention. Even when the environment shifts a slope in the ground, a gentle breeze, or a change in lighting, the parietal lobe adapts seamlessly. It receives sensory input, compares it with internal expectations, and makes small adjustments to maintain balance. This constant recalibration keeps each movement smooth and grounded. An especially remarkable aspect of spatial awareness is the brain's ability to imagine space even when it is not directly perceived. You can picture the layout of a familiar room, imagine an object's location behind you, or recall the position of items in a drawer without seeing them. This ability reflects the parietal lobe's connection to higher cognitive functions, allowing mental representations of space to coexist with physical ones. These mental maps are flexible and can be updated when new information arrives. They allow the brain to plan movements in advance, anticipate outcomes, and navigate through complex environments with ease. Spatial awareness also intertwines with attention. When focusing on an object or area of the environment, the parietal lobe shifts perceptual resources toward that region. This shift is gentle and often unconscious. You might notice a movement at the edge of your vision or feel yourself drawn to a sound in the distance. The parietal lobe helps redirect awareness subtly, ensuring that important details are not missed. These shifts of attention guide the eyes, head, and body to orient toward what matters most, making navigation intuitive. At the deepest level, spatial awareness is about the relationship between the self and the guiding world. It anchors the body within its environment, creating a quiet sense of connection to the physical space around you. This anchoring supports not only movement but also emotional stability. The parietal lobe's gentle monitoring of the body's position provides a continuous sense of orientation that helps calm the mind. It supports the inner feeling of being centered, balanced, and integrated with the environment. As we imagine the parietal lobe at work, we might picture it as a quiet observer, always attentive, always balancing sensory streams, and always guiding the body through space. It receives countless messages every moment: soft signals from the skin, subtle shifts in muscle tension, the weight of the body against the floor, the visual shapes of the room, and the quiet vibrations of sound. It weaves all of these into a coherent understanding of place and direction. Through its work, the brain maintains an unbroken sense of where we are, helping each movement feel natural, each step feel secure, and each moment feel connected to the surrounding world. 12 integrating senses into one peaceful picture. The world never arrives through a single doorway. At every moment, sensations pour gently into the mind from many directions: touch, vision, sound, the body's internal signals, and the subtle sense of position that guides every movement. Yet somehow, despite these countless streams, the experience of the world feels unified and continuous. A sound aligns perfectly with a visual impression. A gentle touch matches the position of a limb, and the environment feels whole. This seamless blending of senses happens largely within the parietal lobe, a region devoted not only to receiving sensations but to integrating them into a calm, coherent picture of reality. In this part of our journey, we drift into that quiet integration, one smooth tapestry of perception. To begin imagining this, picture yourself walking slowly through a quiet room. As you move, your feet feel the texture of the floor beneath them. Your eyes take in the soft shapes of the surrounding space. Your ears hear the faint whisper of air. Your muscles and joints send signals describing the angle of each step and the position of your limbs. Even your inner ear contributes, offering gentle messages about balance and motion. None of these sensations operates alone. Instead, the parietal lobe draws them together, combining them into one smooth experience that feels natural and whole. This blending is not abrupt or mechanical. It is subtle, organic, and deeply coordinated, like multiple delicate streams flowing into a single, quiet lake. The parietal lobe achieves this through its position and its extensive connections. Information from the occipital lobe, auditory cues from the temporal lobe, and internal signals from the insular regions. It holds all of these gently, comparing them, aligning them, and shaping them into an integrated sense of what is happening in the present moment. In this way, it acts as a natural mediator among the senses, offering stability and coherence to perception. One of the most important aspects of sensory integration is the blending of touch and vision. When reaching toward an object, for example, the brain must understand both its location and its texture. The eyes provide information about shape, color, and distance, while the fingertips provide details about surface and pressure. The parietal lobe brings these two streams together so that the movement toward the object feels coordinated. This coordination allows the hand to open at the correct moment, approach with the correct angle, and adjust grip smoothly. Without this integration, the action would feel uncertain or mismatched, as though the senses were speaking in different languages. Instead, the parietal lobe ensures that all sensations align harmoniously. Auditory information also contributes to this picture. Soft sounds can help orient the body within space even before the eyes confirm the source. A gentle tap, a distant hum, or the sound of footsteps carries spatial meaning. How far away something is, what direction it lies in, and how it might be moving. The parietal lobe incorporates these auditory cues with visual and tactile signals to refine the internal map of the environment. This integration creates a three-dimensional understanding of space, one that remains stable even when the environment changes slightly. The nervous system's interconnected design supports this integration beautifully, just as it supports the merging of sensory input and motor output to maintain balance and coordination. Another important element of sensory integration is the blending of proprioception with external cues. Proprioception provides the sense of bodily position and movement, allowing the brain to track the limbs without looking at them. When combined with visual information, proprioception enhances the accuracy of movement, making it possible to reach precisely for an object or adjust posture easily. The parietal lobe uses proprioceptive signals to create a stable sense of orientation, ensuring that the body remains grounded even as it moves. This grounding supports calmness, allowing actions to unfold without hesitation. It also contributes to the brain's internal sense of self, the quiet awareness of the body that remains present even in stillness. Touch, too, blends with memory. When the hand encounters a familiar texture, the parietal lobe communicates with the temporal lobe to recall similar experiences. This cross-lobe collaboration helps the brain interpret new sensations with confidence, making the world feel familiar and predictable. The body's organ systems cooperate to maintain stability in earlier teachings. We saw how the cardiovascular, urinary, and respiratory systems work together through feedback loops, each contributing to a broader stability in the body. In the same way, the brain's sensory systems merge their contributions into a single, balanced perception. The integration of senses also supports planning and attention. When focusing on a task, the parietal lobe helps select which sensory details to emphasize. It chooses what matters most, perhaps a soft sound or a subtle shift in light, and brings it gently to awareness. This selective attention is part of what makes perception feel manageable rather than overwhelming. It ensures that the mind remains clear, choosing one sensory stream to guide action while letting others drift peacefully in the background. This quiet prioritization helps organize thought and supports the calm, rhythmic flow of experience. Even emotional tone plays a role in sensory integration. The parietal lobe interacts with emotional centers, weaving subtle feeling states into sensory experiences. A warm surface might feel comforting, a gentle sound might feel soothing, the soft glow of light might feel calming. These emotional impressions are not separate from sensory input, they are part of the integrated picture. The brain senses both the physical qualities of an experience and the emotional resonance, combining them in a way that supports internal balance and well-being. The integration of senses also contributes to our sense of time. Experiences feel continuous because the parietal lobe blends successive sensations smoothly, allowing one moment to transition quietly into the next. Sensory input does not arrive in isolated bursts. It flows continuously, and the brain organizes this flow into a narrative of experience. This continuity shapes the calm feeling that life progresses gently, moment by moment, without abruptness or fragmentation. Reflect on this gentle capability. We see the parietal lobe as a quiet center, where sensory information is softened, blended, and made meaningful. It does not work alone. It communicates constantly with other lobes and with the deeper structures of the nervous system. But in this collaboration, it provides something essential, a unified picture of the world that feels smooth, coherent, and grounded. Through its work, the brain understands the environment, positions the body within it, and aligns perception with action. And as we continue onward to explore the temporal lobe and beyond, this sense of harmony remains a steady guide, reminding us that every perception is a blend of many soft streams flowing together into one peaceful whole. 13. Following the curves, the shape of the temporal lobe along the gentle sides of the cerebrum, resting just above the ears and tucked beneath the sweeping arch of the frontal and parietal regions, lies the temporal lobe, a softly curved structure shaped like a quiet crescent along the lower portion of the brain. Its position gives it a sense of shelter, as though it lives in the quieter folds of the mind, away from the broad expanse of the frontal lobe and the crown-like rise of the parietal region. When imagined in this calm, sleep-friendly way, the temporal lobe feels like a place of inward listening and subtle memory, a region that receives, interprets, and stores the gentle flow of sounds, meanings, and experiences that drift into consciousness each day. Its shape follows the natural curve of the skull, almost like a protective alcove, and this curved form supports the functions it performs, functions that rely on both sensitivity and depth of processing. The temporal lobe rests horizontally within the brain, extending from the temples toward the back of the head. Its upper boundary is formed by the lateral sulcus, a prominent groove that separates it from the frontal and parietal lobes above. Yet, as with all the lobes of the brain, these boundaries feel more like soft transitions than strict divisions. Neural pathways cross these borders effortlessly, allowing information to travel from hearing to memory, from sound to meaning, from visual cues to emotional interpretation. When we consider the temporal lobe's shape, we must also consider its role as a bridge, a region that collects sensory input and guides it toward deeper understanding. Anatomically, the temporal lobe contains several gyri, long ridges running parallel to one another along its surface. These ridges contribute to the lobe's distinctive, layered appearance. The superior, middle, and inferior temporal gyri provide structure for different functions, though again, the brain does not strictly isolate these roles. Instead, each gyrus communicates with its neighbors, blending auditory, linguistic, visual, and emotional impressions into a cohesive experience. The temporal lobe's shape offers room for these parallel networks to coexist, stretching along the sides of the cerebrum like pathways in a quiet forest, each path slightly different yet connected to the same peaceful landscape. Deep within the temporal lobe lies the medial region, where some of the brain's most meaningful structures reside. Nestled within its inner folds are the hippocampus and nearby areas that support memory formation. This part of the lobe curves inward and backward, creating a shape sometimes described as resembling a seahorse. The hippocampus helps store new experiences, allowing them to become lasting memories rather than fleeting impressions. Its position deep within the temporal lobe feels symbolically fitting. Memory emerges not from the surface of thought but from a deeper place, where experiences settle and take root. The curved structure of this region mirrors the gentle loops of memory itself, which returns to the mind in quiet waves rather than straight lines. The shape of the temporal lobe also supports its role in processing sound. The primary auditory cortex, located in the superior part of the lobe, receives sound waves that have been translated into electrical signals by the delicate structures of the inner ear. These signals arrive with remarkable precision, allowing the brain to detect pitch, rhythm, tone, and subtle variations in sound. The temporal lobe, with its sheltered position and curved architecture, seems perfectly suited for this role. Sound arrives, wraps gently into the folds of the cortex, and is transformed into meaning. This transformation happens quickly but not abruptly. Instead, it moves through steps of interpretation that feel fluid, beginning with basic recognition and gradually progressing toward understanding. Because of the temporal lobe's shape and connections, it not only interprets sound, but also helps bind it to other sensory experiences. For example, when hearing a familiar voice, the auditory cortex recognizes its tone, while the nearby memory structures recall the identity of the speaker. The temporal lobe links these impressions into a single perception. Similarly, when hearing a melody, it may recall emotions associated with the tune or memories connected to past experiences. This blending of sound and meaning is not limited to memory. It also involves language. In the left hemisphere, for many individuals, parts of the temporal lobe help interpret words, sentences, and linguistic patterns, transforming sound into understanding. In this way, the temporal lobe acts as a translator of both the outer world and the inner world of thought. Visual information also passes through the temporal lobe, particularly in regions involved in recognizing faces, objects, and scenes. The temporal lobe helps distinguish the identity of what is seen, who a person is, what an object might be, or whether something is familiar. These functions blend effortlessly with memory. Seeing a familiar face may trigger warm emotions or vivid recollections, illustrating the close relationship between visual recognition and memory pathways in the temporal lobe. Its curved structure serves as a corridor through which vision and memory meet, allowing recognition to feel instantaneous and natural. Another dimension of the temporal lobe's shape involves its connection to emotion. Through its deep links to the limbic system, including the amygdala, a structure involved in emotional responses, the temporal lobe helps attach feelings to experiences. When something evokes warmth, calm, or nostalgic comfort, the temporal lobe participates in that emotional coloring. Its inward curve toward the center of the brain brings it close to these limbic structures, creating an anatomical relationship that mirrors their functional closeness. This proximity allows sensory input, memory, and emotion to intertwine gently, forming the layers of experience that shape mood and meaning. The temporal lobe also assists in the perception of time. While time itself is not a physical sensation, the brain's interpretation of time, its flow, rhythm, and continuity relies partly on networks within this lobe. The temporal lobe helps the mind understand sequences, recall events in order, and anticipate what comes next. This sense of temporal flow contributes to the feeling of movement through life, allowing experiences to have beginnings, middles, and ends. In this sense, the temporal lobe supports not only memory but also narrative, the ability to perceive life as a continuous, meaningful story. When we imagine the temporal lobe as part of the gentle architecture of the brain, we see it as a region shaped for both reception and reflection. Its curves hold the sounds of the world, its inner folds cradle memories, and its pathways blend perception with emotion. It feels like a place of quiet depth, where experiences settle softly, and the mind listens inwardly. Even as we move through the world externally, the temporal lobe creates an inner landscape rich with sound, meaning, memory, and connection. As we move forward into later parts of this sleep-friendly journey, we will explore the deeper functions of the temporal lobe: hearing, memory, language, and the passage of time. But here, In this gentle introduction to its shape and position, we can appreciate the beauty of its form, a curved, sheltering region on each side of the brain, devoted to receiving the world softly and shaping it into the rich tapestry of experience that accompanies us through each quiet moment. 14. Hearing and the music of neuronal signals. Hearing, in its gentlest form, is a kind of quiet music that the brain performs within itself. Long before a sound becomes a word, a melody, or a memory, it begins as a vibration moving softly through air. These waves reach the ear, touch delicate structures deep within it, and are transformed into signals that travel inward toward the brain. When those signals arrive within the temporal lobe, especially in the auditory cortex, they become something more. In this part of our journey, we drift slowly through the pathways of hearing, observing how the temporal lobe interprets the world of sound and how its gentle activity shapes understanding and calm perception. Imagine a single sound, a quiet voice, a soft breeze, or the subtle hum of evening air. The sound begins its journey at the outer ear, where the shape of the ear collects waves and funnels them inward. These vibrations pass through the ear canal, causing the eardrum to tremble with a motion so small it can barely be felt. Deep inside the middle ear, 3 tiny bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes, amplify this motion, carrying it forward with delicate precision. Their movements set the fluid of the inner ear into motion, stirring the spiral structure of the cochlea. Along the cochlea's interior lie thousands of hair cells, arranged in gentle rows, each one sensitive to a particular frequency. When the fluid moves, these hair cells bend and sway, releasing electrical signals that travel along the auditory nerve into the brainstem and onward toward the temporal lobes. Although these early steps occur outside conscious awareness, they form the foundation of how the brain receives its auditory world. As the auditory signals rise into the brain, they reach the primary auditory cortex, located within the upper part of the temporal lobe. Here, the brain begins to distinguish the basic qualities of sound, pitch, volume, duration, and rhythm. But these elements are not recognized all at once. Instead, they unfold in a soft sequence. The brain first acknowledges the presence of sound, then the tone, then the pattern. Even the simplest sound is composed of these layers, and the temporal lobe gently separates and reassembles them. This early stage of processing is similar to the occipital lobe's first steps in vision, where raw light becomes edges and contours. In the auditory cortex, vibrations become frequencies and patterns, the earliest foundations of what will become meaning. The arrangement of the auditory cortex mirrors the orderliness of the world of sound. It is organized tonotopically, meaning that neighboring regions respond to neighboring frequencies. Low tones activate one area, while higher tones activate another, forming a smooth gradient across the cortex. This gentle arrangement allows the brain to interpret sounds with clarity and nuance. Even complex soundscapes, such as music or layered environmental noises, are broken down into simpler components before being integrated once more. The brain does not rush through this process. It follows a natural rhythm, stepping through interpretation like soft musical notes, drifting one after another. Once the primary auditory cortex has done its work, the information spreads to surrounding regions of the temporal lobe, where recognition begins to take shape. For example, when hearing a familiar voice, the brain identifies the unique tonal qualities that distinguish one person from another. This recognition happens quickly, but not abruptly. It relies on memory stored deep within the medial temporal regions, including the hippocampus, which compares present sound patterns to those learned in the past. This blending of sound and memory is seamless, allowing the brain to recognize voices, musical phrases, and environmental noises with ease. Such recognition helps create continuity in life, where familiar sounds carry emotional warmth or a sense of stability. Hearing also contributes significantly to language. The left temporal lobe, in most individuals, contains regions dedicated to understanding words and sentences. When someone speaks, The brain must determine not only the sounds produced, but also the meaning behind them. The auditory cortex passes information to language processing areas that interpret words, grammar, and contextual cues. This interpretation is gentle and layered. Words unfold into meaning through a quiet interplay between the auditory cortex and the broader network of language-related areas. Even in silence, when reading or thinking, these networks may activate softly, replaying the patterns of language internally. Sound itself often carries emotional tone, and the temporal lobe assists in interpreting this as well. The pitch and rhythm of a voice can convey calmness, joy, curiosity, or reassurance. Through its connections with the limbic system, the temporal lobe adds emotional interpretation to auditory input. These emotional layers are not separate from sound. They are woven seamlessly into the auditory experience. In this way, hearing becomes more than a physical process. It becomes a means of emotional connection and internal resonance. Spatial hearing, the ability to determine the direction and distance of sounds, also arises from temporal lobe processing. The brain compares the slight differences in timing and intensity between the sounds reaching one ear versus the other. These small variations are analyzed effortlessly, allowing the listener to understand where a sound originates. This spatial sense supports orientation, movement, and safety, contributing to the parietal lobe's internal map of the environment. As with all sensory integration, these processes occur without strain. They drift beneath awareness, guiding the body gently. The temporal lobe's role in hearing also extends to rhythm and timing. When listening to a steady beat or the cadence of speech, the brain detects patterns and aligns them with expectations. This ability supports not only music appreciation but also communication. Speech flows with rhythm, pauses, emphasis, and variation in tone, and the temporal lobe helps interpret these patterns. It guides understanding of when a sentence ends, when meaning shifts, or when emphasis changes. This sensitivity to temporal structure gives language its expressive depth. Hearing is also deeply tied to memory. A melody heard long ago can return vividly, carrying emotional weight or bringing a sense of calm. The temporal lobe stores not only the structure of the melody but also the context in which it was first heard. This connection contributes to the rich emotional dimension of sound. The hippocampus and its surrounding regions help encode these experiences, allowing them to return later with striking clarity. In this way, sound acts as a bridge between past and present, linking distant moments with current experience. Even silence has meaning in the temporal lobe. The absence of sound can feel peaceful or reflective, allowing the mind to rest gently in the quiet. In such moments, the brain does not shut down. It simply shifts into a state of calm observation. The auditory cortex remains receptive, listening softly for changes, ready to interpret new sounds as they arise. This quiet listening state mirrors the brain's natural balance, alert yet calm, attentive yet unhurried. As we visualize the temporal lobe at work, we might imagine it as a soft chamber of resonance, receiving vibrations from the world and transforming them into understanding. Its curves shelter the delicate processes of hearing, memory, language, and emotional tone. Through its gentle activity, the seemingly invisible world of sound becomes a source of connection, grounding, and meaning. And as we continue deeper into this sleep-friendly journey, the quiet music of neuronal signals reminds us that even the softest sounds can shape the inner world with calm, steady presence. 15. Memory, emotion, and the passage of time. Memory is one of the mind's gentlest threads, weaving the past into the present in soft, continuous strands. It does not arrive all at once or in loud declarations. It drifts through awareness like a quiet echo, bringing forward the traces of moments long gone and allowing them to live again in thought, sensation, and emotion. Deep within the temporal lobe, especially in its medial regions, lie structures that cradle these delicate recollections. Here, Memories are formed, shaped, and stored with patient precision. This part of the brain supports not only the recall of events, but also the emotional tone that accompanies them, and through this relationship, it also contributes to the brain's sense of time, the way moments feel connected, the way days unfold in sequence, and the way experiences carry meaning across the span of a life. In this part of our journey, we drift gently through these inner processes, exploring how the temporal lobe nurtures memory and emotion, and how it helps create the subjective flow of time. At the heart of the temporal lobe's memory system lies the hippocampus, a curved structure nestled deep within its medial folds. The hippocampus is not large, yet its role is profound. It helps convert new experiences, sounds, images, emotions, and sensations into stable memories that can be revisited later. This process does not happen instantly. When something occurs, the brain does not simply store it like a file in a drawer. Instead, the experience is encoded gradually through patterns of neuronal activity. Networks of neurons strengthen their connections, forming pathways that represent the event. The hippocampus helps organize these patterns, linking them with context, time, and emotional significance. These early impressions are soft and flexible, and over time they settle more deeply into the cortex, becoming part of the mind's long-term memory system. Emotions play a central role in this process, and the temporal lobe's relationship with the limbic system makes this connection natural and seamless. Located near the hippocampus is the amygdala, a structure involved in emotional processing. When an experience carries emotional weight, whether warmth, calmness, curiosity, or quiet reflection, the amygdala becomes active. It communicates closely with the hippocampus, marking memories with emotional tone. This signal tells the brain that the event holds significance, and it should be remembered more clearly. Even gentle emotions can influence memory, shaping the way the brain recalls certain moments with vivid clarity or soft nostalgia. This link explains why memories of emotionally meaningful events feel richer. It also shows how deeply emotion is woven into the fabric of memory, not as an addition, but as part of its foundation. While the hippocampus supports the formation of new memories, the surrounding temporal regions help store and retrieve them. The cortex along the temporal lobe contains neural networks that hold long-term memories of faces, voices, objects, places, and experiences. These memories do not sit in isolated 14 compartments. Instead, they are organized across many interconnected pathways. When recalling something familiar, a childhood home, a voice heard long ago, or a gentle moment shared with someone, the brain reactivates the same networks that were involved during the original experience. The memory returns not as a perfect replica, but as a quiet reconstruction, built from stored fragments. This reconstruction feels natural and fluid, shaped by both the accuracy of the neural pathways and the emotion associated with them. Memory is not only stored for recollection, it also supports prediction and planning. The temporal lobe helps the brain compare the present moment with similar experiences from the past. If a situation feels familiar, the brain draws upon stored memories to guide expectations. This process happens quietly, beneath conscious awareness. It allows the mind to move smoothly through familiar environments, recognize subtle patterns, and anticipate outcomes with ease. The hippocampus's ability to encode context, where something happened, when it happened, and how it felt, provides the foundation for this predictive understanding. It forms an internal map of experience that supports both recollection and the planning of future actions. Time is not sensed directly, the way sound or light is sensed. Instead, it is experienced through the brain's ability to connect moments and maintain continuity. The hippocampus helps organize events into a sequence, allowing the brain to recall not only what happened, but also the order in which it occurred. This sequencing gives the mind a sense of flow, a sense that one moment leads gently into another. Without this ordering, memories would feel scattered and disconnected. Instead, the brain weaves them into a coherent narrative, shaping the feeling of time passing smoothly and meaningfully, but also by emotion. A peaceful moment may seem to stretch softly, while a calm day might feel as though it passes in a single breath. The temporal lobe, through its connection to emotional centers, shapes these impressions quietly. It helps the mind sense the rhythm of life, not through clocks or measurements, but through the emotional texture of experience. This interplay between memory, emotion, and time creates the subjective flow that accompanies daily life. It allows the mind to reflect gently on the past, experience the present with clarity, and anticipate the future with openness. The temporal lobe also supports autobiographical memory, the quiet story the mind tells about one's own life. These memories form the foundation of identity, shaping the understanding of who we are and how we have grown. They are not stored in one place. Instead, they arise from the cooperation of memory networks throughout the brain. The hippocampus helps form them, the cortex preserves them, and the emotional systems color them with tone and meaning. When recalling a personal moment, a gentle conversation, a place visited often, or a peaceful routine, the temporal lobe helps bring forward not only the details, but the feelings associated with them. This integration gives personal memory its richness and depth. As we move deeper into this gentle exploration, it becomes clear that the temporal lobe does more than store memories. It creates continuity. It links emotion with experience, weaving each moment into the larger fabric of life. It helps the brain sense the quiet passage of time and feel the meaning carried by familiar places, sounds, and relationships. Through its curves and networks, the temporal lobe becomes a sanctuary of inner life, where memories settle softly, emotions resonate warmly, and the flow of time unfolds with calm and steady grace. 16. Language, understanding, and calm. Comprehension. Language reaches the mind not as a single stream, but as a gentle weave of sound, meaning, rhythm, and memory. It arrives through the ears, shaped by the world outside, and settles into the folds of the temporal lobe, where comprehension quietly begins. Here, in the shaded interior of the brain's listening regions, words unfold slowly into understanding. This transformation from vibration to meaning happens so seamlessly that we rarely notice the delicate steps involved. Yet each step is precise, patient, and carefully balanced, drawing upon networks that span the entire brain. In this part of our sleep-friendly journey, we drift into the temporal lobe's role in language and follow the soft currents of communication that flow through daily life. When someone speaks, the sound enters the ear and travels inward as vibration, eventually becoming a pattern of electrical signals carried along the auditory nerve. These signals reach the primary auditory cortex in the temporal lobe, where the brain begins its first layer of interpretation. At this early stage, the brain identifies the basic elements of speech: pitch, rhythm, volume, and the subtle distinctions between consonants and vowels. These initial impressions are like the brushstrokes of a painting, not yet a full picture, but the beginnings of form. They drift into surrounding areas of the temporal lobe, particularly into regions known for processing the structure of language. There, the brain gently assembles small units of sound into recognizable patterns, transforming the building blocks of speech into familiar syllables and words. The left temporal lobe plays a particularly important role for most individuals, especially in a region traditionally referred to as Wernicke's area. This area serves as a quiet center of language comprehension, where words become meaningful. It does not simply translate sound into definition. Instead, it holds a broad, flexible network of associations that allows the brain to understand not only what a word means, but how it fits into a sentence, a conversation, or a story. This comprehension is not a single event, but a layered, continuous process. The temporal lobe takes in each word, places it in context, and links it with previous knowledge. These connections may involve memories stored in surrounding regions, emotional cues from the limbic system, or visual associations from the occipital lobe. In every case, understanding emerges from many threads woven gently together. The parietal lobe contributes to this process as well, especially when language involves spatial descriptions or sensory references. Words that describe textures, shapes, or positions activate the sensory networks that help represent these experiences. When someone describes a soft surface or a bright landscape, the brain blends linguistic input with stored sensory impressions to form a vivid internal picture. The temporal lobe serves as the interpreter, while the parietal lobe provides the sensory background that gives meaning, depth, and clarity. This collaboration creates a sense of richness that allows words to feel alive, grounded in experience rather than abstract. Context plays an essential role in comprehension. The temporal lobe must evaluate not only the meaning of individual words, but how they fit together. It weighs the grammar, the order of words, and the intonation of the speaker. These elements come together to shape the message, helping the listener determine whether a phrase is literal, metaphorical, gentle, or ironic. The temporal lobe excels at this integration because it is deeply connected to both memory and emotion. A familiar tone may convey reassurance. A paused sentence may signal reflection. Language, in this sense, becomes more than a tool. It becomes a subtle form of social understanding, guided by the quiet collaboration of auditory, emotional, and cognitive networks. As comprehension deepens, the brain begins predicting what might come next in a sentence. This gentle anticipation makes language smoother and easier to follow. It relies on memory, both short-term memory that holds the beginning of a sentence and long-term memory that stores patterns of language learned over a lifetime. The temporal lobe manages these predictions softly, adjusting them continuously as new information arrives. This predictive quality is part of what makes conversation feel fluid. Even when a sentence takes an unexpected turn, the brain quickly reshapes its understanding and continues forward without disruption. Language understanding also depends on the ability to separate the important parts of speech from the background. In a noisier environment, the temporal lobe works harder to filter out irrelevant sounds, allowing the brain to focus on the speaker's voice. This selective listening is not a rigid process but a graceful modulation of attention, supported by networks in the parietal and frontal lobes. These regions help choose which sensory streams to emphasize and which to soften. The emotional tone of language is another layer added by the temporal lobe and its close connection to the limbic system. A gentle voice may evoke calmness, while a warm tone may create feelings of closeness or comfort. Even when the meaning of words is neutral, their emotional tone can color interpretation. The temporal lobe helps identify this tone, interpreting variations in pitch, rhythm, and expression. This emotional interpretation helps guide social understanding, allowing the listener to sense the speaker's mood and respond with appropriate empathy. When language is understood, the frontal lobe often becomes active, shaping responses or guiding further thought. But the temporal lobe remains central in maintaining comprehension throughout an interaction. Its networks hold the meaning of each phrase, allowing the conversation to unfold with continuity. This partnership between temporal and frontal regions mirrors the broader cooperation among all lobes of the brain, a cooperation that supports not only language but every aspect of awareness. Even silent reading activates many of the same networks involved in spoken language comprehension. The temporal lobe translates written words into internal sound patterns, linking them with meaning. It forms internal narratives in the same gentle way it processes external speech. The brain hears the words softly, even when no sound is present. This inner voice is one of the quietest forms of language, yet it is shaped by the same structures, the same memories, and the same pathways that guide ordinary comprehension. Language understanding is also tied to the brain's sense of time. Sentences unfold one word at a time, requiring the brain to hold previous words in memory while waiting for the next. This temporal sequencing uses the silation memory networks of the medial temporal lobe, which help create a sense of rhythm and continuity. Without this ability, language would feel disjointed, a scattering of independent sounds rather than a cohesive flow. Instead, the brain binds each moment of speech into a meaningful stream, moving gently from beginning to end. As we reflect on the temporal lobe's role in understanding language, we can imagine it as a patient, attentive listener within the mind. It receives sounds softly, shapes them into patterns, blends them with memory and emotion, and allows meaning to emerge gradually. Through this quiet process, the temporal lobe supports one of the most human of abilities, the capacity to listen, understand, and connect. Its gentle work allows language to become not only a tool of communication, but a soothing, continuous thread that unites thought, emotion, and shared experience. 17. The occipital lobe, a sanctuary for vision. At the quiet back of the brain, tucked gently beneath the curve of the skull and resting like a calm shoreline, far from the busier regions of thought and movement, lies the occipital lobe. This region feels almost like a sanctuary, an area devoted to the soft reception and careful interpretation of light. In the gentle language of the brain, the occipital lobe serves as the place where vision begins to take shape, not as a fully formed picture, but as a serene unfolding of patterns, colors, shadows, and subtle movements. Even though the eyes gather light and send it inward, it is the occipital lobe that gives that light meaning, turning it into the scenes, shapes, and pathways that guide daily life. In this part of our journey, we drift into this calm space and explore how the brain receives visual information, organizes it, and transforms it into the peaceful imagery that fills awareness. The occipital lobe sits at the very back of the cerebrum, occupying a region that gently slopes downward toward the base of the skull. Its position feels somewhat sheltered, as though protected from the sensory bustle of the world. This distance is fitting because the work of the occipital lobe requires clarity, an uninterrupted flow of signals from the eyes, processed in a way that allows the mind to perceive the world softly and accurately. Its structure consists of several layers of cortex, each dedicated to processing different aspects of visual information. Though small compared to the frontal or parietal lobes, it carries a delicate precision. The neurons here respond to the faintest details, lines of different orientations, shifts in brightness, subtle edges, and the graceful movement of objects through space. Before information reaches the occipital lobe, it begins its journey at the eyes. Light enters the eye and passes through the lens, focusing onto the retina, a thin layer of photoreceptive cells lining the back of the eye. These cells convert light into electrical signals that travel along the optic nerve. As the signals move toward the brain, they pass through the optic chiasm, where some fibers gently cross paths, allowing each hemisphere of the brain to receive information from both eyes. This crossing creates a balanced visual field. The left occipital lobe receives information from the right side of the visual world, and the right lobe receives information from the left side. This organization helps keep perception smooth and coordinated, giving the mind a continuous sense of symmetry. When these visual signals finally arrive in the primary visual cortex, also known as V1, they enter a region that is beautifully specialized. The neurons in V1 respond to very specific features, the angles of edges, the directions of lines, and the contrast between light and dark. At this stage, the brain does not yet interpret meaning. Instead, it begins by breaking the visual world into simple components, almost like separating the first brushstrokes of a painting. This calm, orderly process allows the brain to assemble vision from small, precise details, building a foundation that will later support more complex interpretation. From V1, information flows outward into secondary and tertiary visual regions, often referred to as V2, V3, V4, and beyond. Each of these areas adds a new layer of understanding. Some regions focus on color perception, helping the brain recognize warm and cool tones, soft gradients, and the natural palette of the environment. Others focus on depth and motion, interpreting how objects move across the visual field, or how they appear nearer or farther away. Still others support the recognition of shapes and patterns. These areas work together in a beautifully coordinated sequence, each contributing its quiet specialty to the final experience of vision. One of the most remarkable features of the visual system is that its pathways branch outward from the occipital lobe in two gentle streams, each with a different purpose. The dorsal stream, often described as the wear pathway, flows upward into the parietal lobe. It helps the brain understand movement, spatial orientation, and the position of objects in relation to the body. This stream allows the mind to follow a moving shape, sense the distance of a surface, or reach for an object with accuracy. The ventral stream, known as the what pathway, flows forward into the temporal lobe. It supports object recognition, face identification, and the interpretation of complex visual patterns. Through this pathway, the brain understands what it is seeing, whether it is a familiar face, a gentle curve of a leaf, or the shape of a quiet room. The occipital lobe's processing is never isolated. It constantly communicates with the rest of the brain, sharing visual information that supports movement, memory, and emotional interpretation. When the temporal lobe recalls a familiar setting, the occipital lobe helps provide visual details. When the parietal lobe guides the body through space, visual cues help refine posture and motion. Even the frontal lobe makes use of visual input when forming decisions, anticipating outcomes, or focusing attention. Through these connections, the occipital lobe enriches the mind's understanding of the world, ensuring that vision remains integrated with thought, sensation, and action. Much of the occipital lobe's work happens without conscious effort. When walking through a peaceful landscape or sitting quietly in a room, the brain constantly interprets light flowing into the eyes. It monitors shadows, traces contours, follows the soft movement of leaves, or notices the gentle flicker of light reflecting off a still surface. Even when vision is not the focus of awareness, the occipital lobe remains active, organizing the world into a quiet backdrop that supports a sense of stability. This contributes to the calm feeling of simply being present, knowing where one is, sensing the boundaries of space, and feeling oriented within the environment. When picturing a scene, the soft glow of a sunset, a calm forest, or the outline of a familiar face, the brain activates many of the same regions used for actual vision. The occipital lobe participates in these inner images, shaping imagination into gentle visual form. This overlap explains why mental pictures can feel vivid even without external light, and why memory can sometimes evoke images with surprising clarity. The occipital lobe, though primarily devoted to receiving the external world, even during sleep, when the eyes are closed and the external world slips away, the occipital lobe remains softly active. Dreams often contain visual elements, floating scenes, shifting colors, or imagined environments, and these too involve the occipital cortex. The difference is that during dreaming, the input comes from within, the brain, rather than from the eyes. The occipital lobe becomes a canvas for the mind's quiet nocturnal stories, blending memory, emotion, and imagination into visual form. As we reflect on the occipital lobe's place in the gentle architecture of the brain, we can imagine it as a peaceful chamber of light and shadow. Instead, it receives the world softly, interprets it patiently, and shares its insights with the rest of the mind. It transforms beams of light into a serene understanding of space, shape, and color. Through its quiet work, the brain sees not only the external world, but the internal landscapes of imagination and memory. And in this calm, illuminated sanctuary, vision becomes one of the mind's most peaceful forms of awareness. 18 light, color, and the gentle processing of visual detail light enters our awareness in the softest of ways. It drifts across the world, reflects gently from surfaces, and moves through the eyes in a stream so quiet we hardly notice its passage. Yet this quiet stream carries rich information: hues, brightness, edges, contrasts, and the subtle patterns that shape every visual experience. Deep within the occipital lobe, the brain receives this delicate river of light and begins a careful, unhurried transformation. The occipital lobe does not hurry, and it does not overwhelm. Instead, it treats each detail with softness, separating light into its elemental features and then weaving it together into a gentle, coherent image. In this part of our journey, we ease into this intricate process, exploring how the occipital lobe interprets color, brightness, form, and motion with calm precision. To imagine this process, picture a single ray of sunlight falling on a leaf. The light carries countless wavelengths, each corresponding to a small variation in color. The retina captures this array of wavelengths through two primary types of photoreceptors, cones. Cones detect color, and rods, which detect light intensity. These receptors send signals through the optic nerve toward the brain, encoding color not as a sensation but as a set of electrical impulses. The occipital lobe then begins the quiet work of interpretation. This transformation from wavelength to color does not happen in one step. Instead, it unfolds as a series of gentle refinements, each carried out by neurons attuned to different aspects of the visual world. When these signals reach the primary visual cortex, the brain identifies boundaries, edges, where one color ends and another begins, subtle changes in contrast, and faint variations in brightness. This early stage of processing may seem simple, yet it forms the foundation for all later visual interpretation. Without these delicate distinctions, the world would appear blurred or indistinct. Neurons within this region respond to specific orientations of lines. Some detect horizontal edges, others vertical ones, and others diagonal or curved shapes. As the signals drift through these networks, the brain begins creating a map of the scene in front of the eyes, an initial sketch drawn softly in patterns of neural activity. Color processing becomes more refined as signals move into secondary visual regions. The brain maintains dedicated networks for perceiving hues, allowing it to distinguish warm colors from cool ones, subtle tones from vivid ones, and harmonious blends from sharp contrasts. These regions respond not only to simple colors, but to combinations shifts from one tone to another, gradients of light across a surface, and the delicate transitions that give objects depth and texture. This soft sensitivity helps explain why certain visual experiences feel calming. The brain processes gentle color transitions with ease, allowing the mind to rest in the subtle harmony of light. Brightness, too, plays a role in this peaceful processing. The occipital lobe evaluates how much light is present and how it shifts across the environment. These changes help the brain perceive dimension, how objects curve, where shadows fall, and how surfaces reflect or absorb light. This interpretation is essential for recognizing shapes and understanding the physical world. A softly lit room, for example, may appear soothing because the brain can interpret its contours without sharp contrast. Diffuse light creates smooth gradients the occipital lobe finds easy to process, while harsh light demands more rapid corrections. Even though this happens unconsciously, the difference can influence the emotional tone of a space. As visual signals continue their journey, the brain begins to interpret patterns, clusters of shapes, repeated forms, and familiar silhouettes. This pattern recognition does not rely solely on the occipital lobe. It also involves the ventral stream, which extends toward the temporal lobe. Along this pathway, the brain identifies what an object is: a softly rounded stone, a drifting cloud, or a familiar face. But the foundation of all this recognition lies in the occipital lobe's initial processing of edges, colors, and textures. Without this foundation, even familiar objects would remain unrecognizable. Instead, the brain receives a clear, gently structured visual world, ready for deeper interpretation. Motion is another dimension that the occipital lobe processes with quiet accuracy. Specialized regions detect changes in position, allowing the brain to follow the movement of objects across space. This ability allows a person to watch a leaf drift downward, a shadow shift slowly with the light. The neurons responsible for motion detection respond to direction and speed, adjusting their activity to match the pace of the moving object. When motion is slow and steady, these signals unfold in a soothing rhythm, contributing to the sense of calm that gentle movement often evokes. The brain does not need to react quickly or with urgency. It simply allows motion to pass through awareness like a drifting current. Depth perception is another layer shaped by the occipital lobe's gentle work. By comparing the slightly different images received from the two eyes, the brain constructs a sense of three-dimensional space. This depth allows us to feel grounded within the environment, sensing how far objects lie and how they relate to one another. The occipital lobe refines this perception through careful comparison of visual cues, shadows, perspective, size, and overlapping forms. Together, these cues help the brain create a soft, continuous sense of space that supports orientation and ease of movement. Even imagination draws upon this visual system. When picturing a peaceful scene, a quiet field, a gentle stream, or the soft glow of evening light, the occipital lobe activates many of the same regions used for actual vision. The brain treats internal images with similar processing steps, reinforcing edges, shading, shapes, and softly applying color. This overlap explains why imagined scenes can feel vivid or calming. The same networks that interpret the outside world also help create inner landscapes of peace and clarity. Color itself carries emotional tone, and the occipital lobe's interpretation contributes indirectly to mood. Warm colors may evoke comfort, while cool tones may bring a sense of quiet or spaciousness. These impressions are shaped not only by cultural or personal associations, but also by the way the brain processes different wavelengths. The visual cortex responds to some color patterns more gently than others, allowing certain environments to feel naturally soothing. Soft gradients, muted tones, and balanced lighting can create a peaceful experience because they align with the brain's preferred processing rhythm. As these layers come together, the occipital lobe sends its refined signals to other brain regions, supporting movement, emotion, memory, and decision-making. The frontal lobe uses visual cues to plan actions. The temporal lobe blends visual input with recognition and memory. The parietal lobe uses visual details to guide spatial awareness. Together, these interactions transform simple light into meaningful perception, an experience that feels complete, grounded, and coherent. Through its calm and steady work, the occipital lobe allows the world to appear clear without overwhelming the mind. It receives the complexity of light and transforms it into patterns the brain can understand. It helps shape the quiet interplay of color and form, making vision not only functional but comforting. As we move forward on this gentle exploration of the brain, we carry with us an appreciation for the quiet artistry of the occipital lobe, a region that turns simple light into the peaceful imagery that shapes our inner and outer worlds. 19 visual pathways and the quiet mapping of the world. When we first imagine vision, it may seem like a single, unified experience, one seamless picture unfolding before the eyes. Yet within the brain, this experience is created through many gentle pathways, each one quietly shaping a different part of the visual world. Light begins its journey at the eyes, but it is within the occipital lobe and its connected regions that the mind builds a map of the environment, one that is soft, stable, and reassuring. These visual pathways extend like tranquil rivers across the brain, carrying streams of information that flow into the parietal and temporal lobes, helping the mind understand where things are and what they are. In this calm part of our exploration, we drift along these pathways, observing how they form a peaceful connection between sight and understanding. The journey begins at the retina, where light is transformed into gentle patterns of electrical impulses. These impulses travel along the optic nerves until they reach the optic chiasm, a quiet crossing point beneath the brain. Here, A portion of the fibers gently shifts from one side to the other, ensuring that each hemisphere receives a balanced view of the world. The left occipital lobe interprets what lies in the right visual field, while the right occipital lobe interprets the left. This arrangement creates symmetry within the brain's internal map, helping each moment of vision feel grounded and aligned. The signals then continue their path along the optic tracts, passing through the thalamus, specifically the lateral geniculate nucleus, a relay station that receives them with steady precision and sends them onward into the deeper layers of the visual cortex. When the signals reach the primary visual cortex, the brain begins its first act of visual mapping. Each point in the visual field has a corresponding place within this cortex, forming a perfect correspondence of shape, brightness, and location. This map is not rigid. It is flexible and responsive, shifting smoothly as the eyes move, even when the gaze shifts. Slightly following a drifting shape or observing a soft light, the map adjusts without disruption. This stability contributes to the peaceful sense that the world remains consistent as we look around. The brain supports this experience by integrating eye movements with visual input, creating a smooth continuity even though the eyes themselves move in small, rapid motions. From this primary cortex, the visual pathways separate into two main streams, each carrying its own gentle purpose. The first, known as the dorsal stream, flows upward toward the parietal lobe. It guides the brain's understanding of space, how far objects lie, which direction they move, and how they relate to one another in the environment. It forms a quiet, spatial map that aligns with the body's movements and posture. When reaching for an object, the dorsal stream helps calculate distance. When walking across a room, it assists in guiding steps around nearby objects, of where the body is in space, an essential part of feeling balanced, grounded, and gently oriented in the world. The second pathway, called the ventral stream, flows forward into the temporal lobe. This pathway focuses on recognition, understanding what something is rather than where it lies. It handles the soft recognition of shapes, colors, contours, and familiar forms. Through the ventral stream, the brain recognizes faces, identifies objects, and attaches meaning to what is seen. For example, when observing a leaf, the occipital lobe detects its edges and color. The ventral stream recognizes its shape, recalls its texture, and connects it with memories of trees, seasons, or peaceful walks. This blending of recognition and memory happens gently, allowing the visual world to feel familiar and comforting rather than overwhelming. These two pathways, one devoted to where, the other devoted to what, work in harmony. They do not compete. Instead, they complement each other, just as the brain's lobes do in all aspects of perception. The dorsal stream provides grounding, helping the body navigate smoothly. The ventral stream offers meaning, giving the world its comforting sense of familiarity. The occipital lobe serves as the starting point for both, providing clean, organized visual details that flow outward like whispered messages into the deeper regions of the mind. Yet the pathways are not limited to these two directions. Visual information also spreads to the frontal lobe, where it supports planning, focus, and decision-making. A glance at a gentle landscape may help the mind settle. A soft point of light may guide attention. The brain uses visual cues to choose actions, anticipate changes, or direct the eyes towards something meaningful. Even though this guidance happens beneath awareness, it brings a sense of quiet stability, allowing the mind to feel oriented and steady. Beyond the pathways of sight lies the process of visual integration, the brain's ability to blend visual information with other senses. The parietal lobe merges sight with touch and proprioception, helping form a cohesive sense of the body within its surroundings. The temporal lobe blends sight with memory, allowing recognition to feel immediate and warm. The insula, hidden deep within the brain, adds internal sensations that shape emotional responses to what is seen. Together, These regions create a gentle unity across the senses, supporting the calm, connected way the world appears to the mind. Motion also plays a role in this integration. As objects move across the visual field, the dorsal stream calculates pace and direction, while the occipital cortex interprets the shifting colors and shadows. Motion-sensitive neurons respond to even the softest movement, a drifting cloud, a flicker of candlelight, or the gentle sway of a tree. These motions are interpreted without urgency, allowing the brain to follow them with relaxation. Soft attention to motion contributes to the soothing effect of quiet visual scenes, where slow changes in light or movement help calm the mind. By comparing the slightly different viewpoints from each eye, the brain forms a three-dimensional understanding of the world. This depth allows the mind to feel anchored, sensing how far objects lie and how they relate to one another. The occipital lobe analyzes shadows, perspective, and subtle changes in brightness to refine this sense. The brain then shares this information with the parietal lobe, which uses it to guide the body through space with ease. Even in darkness, when visual input grows faint, the pathways remain ready to receive light. The occipital lobe stays quietly active, maintaining the structure of visual maps. This readiness ensures that when light returns, whether in waking moments or within dreams, the brain can interpret it smoothly. During dreaming, the mind generates its own internal imagery, activating many of the same pathways used for daytime vision. The occipital lobe helps paint these inner scenes, drawing upon memory, imagination, and emotion to create landscapes that unfold softly in sleep. As we reflect on these pathways, we can imagine the visual system as a network of gentle currents flowing outward from the occipital lobe. Each pathway contributes something essential: stability, recognition, orientation, and continuity. Through their calm cooperation, the brain builds a soft, coherent map of the world. It transforms simple light into meaningful experience. And as we prepare to explore the final lobe of the cerebrum, the insular lobe, we carry with us this deep appreciation for the quiet pathways that allow the world to appear before us with calm clarity. 20. The hidden insula. Internal awareness and calm. Integration. Deep within the folds of the brain, tucked gently beneath the temporal, frontal, and parietal lobes, lies a region that feels almost like a quiet room at the center of the mind. This region is the insular lobe, often simply called the insula. Unlike the more visible lobes that define the outer surface of the brain, the insula remains hidden, sheltered beneath layers of cortex. Its position reflects its function. The insula listens inwardly. It receives the body's quiet messages, interprets internal sensations, and weaves them into the soft tapestry of emotional life. Through its gentle activity, the insula helps the mind remain grounded in the body, aware of its internal rhythms, and attuned to the subtle interplay between sensation, emotion, and experience. In this final part of our journey through the brain's lobes, we move inward toward this calm center, exploring how the insula supports inner awareness, emotional balance, and the continuous integration of mind and body. The insula rests within the lateral sulcus, hidden between the folds of the temporal and parietal lobes. It is shaped like a curved island surrounded by the brain's outer regions, and this inward placement feels symbolically fitting. Just as islands sit apart from the motion of waves yet remain connected beneath the surface, the insula rests quietly beneath the outer cortex, receiving signals that arise from deep within the body. Its location grants it access to many different networks, sensory pathways, emotional circuits, and autonomic systems. All send their signals here. Because of this, the insula becomes a meeting point where internal sensations blend with the mind's interpretation of them. It helps shape the subjective experience of being embodied, of having a heartbeat, breath, and continuous internal rhythm. One of the insula's most fundamental roles is interoception, the sense of the body's internal state. Interoception provides awareness of heartbeat, breathing patterns, temperature, thirst, fullness, and subtle muscular tension. These sensations do not always reach conscious awareness. Instead, they drift softly within the background, guiding the brain's understanding of internal balance. The insula receives these internal signals and organizes them, creating a quiet map of the body's physiological condition. This map is not a visual one. It is a felt sense, a gentle impression of how the body is doing at any given moment. When the body is calm, the insula reflects that calm. When the body needs rest, nourishment, or warmth, the insula detects these needs and influences the brain's broader systems to respond. Breathing provides a beautiful example of this process. With each breath, the insula receives subtle signals about the body's oxygen levels, the stretch of the lungs, and the rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. It does not control breathing directly, but it contributes to the awareness of breath, an awareness that can soothe or steady the mind. When breathing slows, the insula notices this shift and helps shape the emotional calm that often follows. When breathing quickens, it signals the need for regulation or rest. Through these mechanisms, the insula plays a quiet role in the brain's gentle self-regulation, helping maintain internal harmony. The insula is also deeply connected to emotion. It does not create emotion on its own, but it helps the brain understand the bodily sensations that accompany emotional states. A warm feeling in the chest, a slight tightening in the stomach, a calm spreading through the limbs. These sensations are interpreted by the insula and integrated with emotional centers like the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Because of this connection, emotions feel embodied. They do not float abstractly within the mind. They settle within the body, shaping posture, breathing, and tone. The insula weaves these physical impressions into emotional awareness, allowing feelings to be understood as both mental and bodily experiences. This embodiment of emotion also contributes to empathy. When observing someone else's emotional expression, the brain activates networks that mirror those feelings internally. The insula participates in this mirroring, helping the observer sense the emotional tone of another person. This is not an intense or overwhelming process. It is subtle, quiet, and often unnoticed. Through the insula, the brain forms an internal resonance with the emotional states of others, supporting a gentle form of empathy that helps guide social understanding and connection. The insula also contributes to decision-making, especially when choices involve internal comfort, bodily needs, or emotional signals. While the frontal lobe helps organize logical reasoning, the insula provides the internal context, how the body feels, whether a choice aligns with emotional well-being, and whether a situation feels calming or stressful. This integration helps create decisions that are both thoughtful and grounded. The insula's signals do not dominate the mind's reasoning. Instead, they provide a quiet layer of internal guidance, helping shape decisions that support balance and health. Taste, too, is processed partly within the insula. When tasting something warm, or sweet, or soothing, the insula helps interpret not only the sensory qualities but also the pleasant emotional response they evoke. This blending of taste and emotion is part of the insula's broader role in integrating sensory experiences with internal states. Similar integration occurs with pain and temperature. The insula receives signals about discomfort or warmth and helps the brain interpret them, shaping behavioral responses and contributing to self-protection. Another gentle function of the insula is its contribution to time perception. While the hippocampus helps organize events into sequences, the insula helps track internal rhythms such as the pace of breathing or the continuity of bodily sensations. This internal timing contributes to the subjective sense of how quickly or slowly time feels like it is passing. When the body is calm and internal rhythms slow, time may feel expansive. When tension rises, time may seem to move differently. The insula does not measure time like a clock. It senses it through bodily cues that drift softly across awareness. The insula's connections to the autonomic nervous system also help maintain internal balance. It receives signals related to heart rate, digestion, and hormonal shifts, and contributes to adjustments that support homeostasis. These adjustments happen quietly, beneath conscious awareness. They ensure that the body remains in equilibrium, responding gently to internal changes and external influences. Because the insula blends internal sensation with emotional tone and self-awareness, it plays a quiet role in mindfulness and inner calm. When attention turns inward toward breath, warmth, or the steady beating of the heart, the insula becomes active. Its networks help the mind stay anchored within the body, fostering a sense of presence and stillness. This inward listening can feel soothing because it aligns with the insula's natural function to help the mind remain aware of the body's calm rhythms. In the broader architecture of the brain, the insula stands as a hidden yet essential center of integration. It listens to the body, interprets its messages. Instead, it serves quietly, forming a bridge between the physiology of the body and the experience of the mind. Through its gentle work, the insula helps create a stable inner world, one that feels aligned, grounded, and softly connected to the rhythms of life. As we bring this journey through the brain's lobes to a close, the insula reminds us of the inward dimension of awareness. Vision, touch, language, and movement connect us to the external world, but the insula connects us to ourselves. It forms the foundation for internal calm, emotional balance, and the subtle presence that accompanies each moment. In this hidden space within the brain, the mind finds a quiet refuge, listening inwardly to the body's soft whispers and weaving them into the peaceful experience of simply being.